The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Storage room. And it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, To Change the Church, Pope Francis and the Future of Catholicism is the book by Russ Douthat. This is from the preface. This is a book about the most important religious story of our time, the fate of the world's largest religious institution under a pope who believes that Catholicism can change in ways that his predecessors rejected, and who faces resistance from Catholics who believe the changes he seeks risk breaking faith with Jesus Christ. It's also a story that cannot be written about neutrally. The outsider to Catholicism is unlikely to fully grasp or appreciate the stakes, or to take the competing theologies as seriously as do the bishops, cardinals, and lay Catholics embroiled in the Church's civil war. The insider, the believer, is likely to be pulled to one side or another to see God's hand at work in either reform or resistance, to assume that Holy Scripture has a favorite in that struggle. So it makes sense at the outset to briefly lay out my own background and biases, the experiences and assumptions that I bring to the telling of this fascinating and very much unfinished story. I was not born a Roman Catholic, but neither did I join the Catholic Church as an adult. My family was Episcopalian in the beginning, and as a child I received a certain amount of religious formation, distinctively strange formation in some cases, in various Protestant circles, mainline and evangelical and Pentecostalist. Then I became a Catholic as a teenager, along with my family, in a shift that I welcomed, but was impelled more by my mother's spiritual journey than my own. So in the world of cradle Catholics and adult converts, groups that are often contrasted with one another and occasionally find themselves at odds, I belong to the little-known third category in between. As a result, I share something with each group while lacking something each enjoys. Like other converts, I did not recite Hail Marys as a child or experience the Church as a deep ancestral inheritance, bound up with blood and class and ethnic patrimony. Instead, I made an intellectualized religious choice, reading the books that converts tend to read and deciding things that they decide, choosing Catholicism because its claims were more convincing than the Protestant churches of my youth. But I did so while I was still half a kid, under strong maternal influence, which meant that I also had elements of the cradle Catholic experience, a devoutly Catholic mother, confirmation classes with other teens rather than the adult-oriented conversion program, an after-school job manning the desk in my parish's priory, a hormonal adolescence, and the attendant Catholic guilt. And it meant that, like all cradle Catholics, I have no way of knowing for certain if I would have chosen the Church simply on my own initiative, independent of family influence. My intellect says yes, but my self-awareness raises an eyebrow because I have a strong interest in religious questions, but relatively little natural piety. I can imagine myself lingering in the antechamber of a conversion, hesitating to pass inside. When I went out into the world, to college and then into journalism, where my identity as a Catholic became more important to my writing, this in-between feeling took on a new cast. In the secular world, my faith made me a curiosity and sometimes an extremist. I was a real live Catholic, not the lapsed or collapsed or Christmas and Easter sort that populates so many campuses and newsrooms. And what's more, I had actually chosen to join the faith, deliberately signed on to all the strange dogmas and strict moral rules. And even if my friends and colleagues noticed that I didn't always live by them, I at least went to Mass every Sunday and spoke up for something called orthodoxy in my writing, which was enough to make me seem like a zealot. The friendly sort, the kind you would have a beer and enjoy an argument with, but a guy with pretty strange ideas all the same. But then if I went among my fellow true believers, both those who had converted and those cradle Catholics who were committed theologically as well as tribally, I was always conscious that my secular friends were wrong, that I wasn't much of a zealot after all, that I lacked something required for the part I had been assigned in my professional life. My fellow serious Catholics seemed to have sincerity and certainty, where I had irony and doubt. They went on retreats and knew that those fast days, knew whose fast days it was, and had special devotions and prayed novenas. I was always forgetting basic prayers and holy days of obligation. They seemed to approach the dogmas and rules as a gift, a source of freedom, a ladder up to God. I wrestled with them, doubted them, disobeyed them, constantly ran variations on Pascal's wager in my head. They joined Opus Dei or attended Latin Masses. I was often at a 5 p.m. guitar class, hating the aesthetics but preferring the schedule because it fit my spiritual sloth. Sometimes I felt as though my conversion was incomplete, awaiting some further grace or transformation. At other times, I felt that I belonged to a category of Catholics that used to be common in Catholic novels and Catholic sociology, but had been abolished somewhere in the 1970s. The good-bad Catholic, or the bad-good one, whose loyalty was stronger than his faith and whose faith was stronger than his practice, but who didn't want the church to change all the rules to make his practice easier, because then what would really be the point? That meant that, unlike many Catholics I knew who were loyal to the church as a community but doubtful of its doctrines, I did not want this tension to be smoothed away by understanding priests and broad-minded theologians. Indeed, the conflict between what I professed and how badly I fell short was part of what made the profession seem plausible, because religion that just confirmed me in my early 21st century of life couldn't possibly be divinely revealed. No, I wanted the church to be the church, to vindicate its claim. Patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. 91 years ago yesterday being Memorial Day, 91 years ago yesterday, Fred Trump, Donald's dad, was arrested in New York City at a Ku Klux Klan riot. Yeah, he was discharged. Fred Trump of 175-24 Devonshire Road, Jamaica, was let out of jail, or let out of being arrested. There's a few other things in the news. One that I wanted to mention very quickly, and that is that the California legislature, the California State Senate actually, is going to vote today on a bill that would establish net neutrality as the law of the land in California. And much like California led with gasoline emissions and things like that on cars, California may well end up leading on this, and if so, that would be really cool. So if you live in California, it's Senate Bill 822. If you live in California, call your state senator and let them know your thoughts on net neutrality. Now, all that said, I wrote an op-ed over the weekend that I sent off to Alternet. It hasn't yet shown up on their website, but I'm assuming it will shortly. And I just wanted to go through it with you. There's some good news at the end of this, but it's going to take a little while to get to that. But starting out, how do authoritarians take over a country? This is an old playbook. It goes all the way back to ancient Rome. How authoritarians take over a country. And there are some very specific actual steps in the process. FDR in 1944, you've heard me play the clip on this show many times. He said, the opposition this year has already imported into this campaign a very interesting thing because it's foreign. They've imported the propaganda technique invented by the dictators abroad. See, the first strategy for seizing and maintaining power if you're an authoritarian is to lie often and lie big. FDR says, remember a number of years ago there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself? The technique was all set out in Hitler's book and was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. Creating that technique, you should never use a small falsehood, always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible, if only you keep repeating it over and over and over again. Yeah, George Lakoff points this out in his book, Don't Think of an Elephant. I pointed out in my book, Cracking the Code. If you say to a little kid, don't run out in the street, in order to process that don't, they have to first process the run out in the street. They have to imagine running into the street and then kind of put a red X through it, you know? So So, you know, when you say don't think of an elephant, the first thing you have to think of is an elephant so that you can then not think of it. And so when Trump says there's spies, the FBI put spies in my campaign, which would be a mind-boggling breach of the ethics of the FBI and of law enforcement. When he makes that accusation, when the newspapers and the non-billionaire owned and controlled press push back on it and say, no, there's no spy inside your campaign, there never was, then, you know, for people to understand that, they first have to imagine a spy in the campaign. And so this is one of the reasons why Trump lies so often and so big, is because those lies actually get him something. This is why 48% of Republicans believe that more than 3 million illegal immigrants voted in the 2016 election, causing Hillary Clinton to have a popular vote total greater than Donald Trump's. 48% of Republicans believe that. More than half Republicans believe that climate change is a hoax. More than 70% of Republicans believe that the Republican tax scam was a giant tax cut for the middle class. Actually, the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of the United States happened in the first year of the Obama administration. It's also why Republicans believe that tax cuts, that deregulating environmental and workplace protections leads to more jobs and more prosperity. All these things are lies. All of them have been repeated over and over and over again by Republicans, and all of them are now believed by, if not a majority, certainly a plurality of Republican voters. Lying works, number one technique. Number two, consolidate your power while you're challenging or co-opting the institutions that might hold you accountable. Now, there's a second piece to this, and that is humiliate and then bring into your orbit people on your side. This, you know, to intimidate your own allies into submissive servility. So start out, you know, with the attacks. That judge was a Mexican. Robert Mueller is running a witch hunt. Congress doesn't have the authority to investigate Republicans, stuff like that, right? And then when Corker and McCain and Flake come out and say, you know, this president does not speak for me. In fact, he does not reflect American values. Destroy them politically. None of these guys, well, McCain is dying, sadly. I mean, you know, he has brain cancer. But Flake and Corker have both been pushed out of the Republican Party. They cannot, these are senators. I mean, being a senator is like a major job. It pays well. There's all kinds of perks. It's a big deal. And you can do some real good for your country if so inclined, or some real damage if you're a Republican. But Flake and Corker have been kicked out of the club because they dared to challenge Trump. It's not about Flake and Corker. It's about all the other Republicans who will now not challenge Trump because they don't want to end up like Flake and Corker. The second part of this is, I mean, this is the calling card of tin pot dictators, by the way. The second part of this is to pack the courts. Mitch McConnell started this process when Barack Obama became president, denying him his court appointees over and over and over again, including Merrick Garland, his court appointee to the Supreme Court. But from literally the lowest courts to the highest courts, Mitch McConnell for 8 years blocked President Obama's nominations. Now they're not just pushing them through, they're blowing up the old blue slip rule where a senator from the state that where the judge is going to be installed can say, no, I don't want that judge in my state. Which was, by the way, one of the techniques that Mitch McConnell used to block so many of Barack Obama's judges. But now, when Amy Klobuchar comes out and says, you know, I don't want these, I don't want these guys in my state, McConnell says, we're going to ignore your, not turn in your blue stuff. We're just going to ignore the whole blue strip process. And then finally, as part of this consolidating power while changing and co-opting the institutions, attacking the FBI, attacking the intelligence communities as partisan, as hustlers, and this whole mens rea thing, which is Latin for state of mind, which says that basically, and this has been included in all of the prison reform, sentencing reform legislation, including the bipartisan stuff. Democrats have been buying this, have been falling for this, basically. What the mens rea provision says is that you can't hold billionaires and CEOs accountable for decisions they make that lead to environmental destruction or death unless you can prove in a court of law that that was their goal, that they specifically made that decision because they wanted Johnny on the factory floor to die when they decided that, you know, we're not going to use that safety equipment anymore, for example. You've got to draw that direct connection. In other words, no more perp walks, no more CEOs being held accountable. And then another tool for the authoritarians in this context, destroying the institutions of governance, is destroy the vote. You've got Kansas's Chris Kobach, KKK, Kansas's Chris Kobach's interstate cross-check program, which has thrown hundreds of thousands of African-American and Hispanic and Asian voters off the voting rolls. You have in Detroit, in the 2016 election that Donald Trump won by 10,400 votes in Michigan, over 75,000 people stood in line for hours in Detroit to vote. And the voting machines recorded no presidential votes for 75,000 people in Detroit, largely black Detroit. The state, and you know, had Trump lost Detroit, he would have lost Michigan. Had he lost Michigan, Hillary Clinton would be president right now. 75,000 voting machines said, nah, nobody pushed the president button. They pushed all the other buttons, Senate, state Senate, whatever, but not president. They stood in line all those hours because they didn't really care about who was president. So when you take all this stuff together, what you see is these deeply anti-democratic changes happening that many historians are just flipped out about. Okay, so that's number two. Number three, attack the press. Edmund Burke, Sir Edmund Burke, who I'm no fan of. You know, he was a major British conservative during the era of the American Revolution. His one redeeming virtue was that he supported the revolution. But he did not support, for example, the right of people to vote unless they were, you know, landholders and wealthy. He coined the phrase the Fourth Estate in 1787, excuse me. And he coined that phrase as a way of saying, you know, that, you know, you've got the first three estates of government, the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, but there needs to be a fourth estate of governance to hold the first three accountable, and that would be a free and independent press. And every democracy since Edmund Burke coined that phrase in 1787, every democracy has included a provision protecting the free press. But when tin pot dictators take over, whether it's Duterte in the Philippines or Erdogan in Turkey or Orban in Hungary, you know, what goes? The free press. Or what gets attacked? The free press. All these guys are screaming fake news. They're following Trump. Says number three, as I recall, I don't have these numbered. I think this is number four. Vilify protesters, minorities, and political enemies to the point of provoking violence against them. Dwight Eisenhower warned that we should not become a nation of dreadful fear and hate. Right, one of my favorite clips, great quote. It's from his farewell address in 1961, in January 1961. And he says, you know, that America should not become a nation of dreadful fear and hate. Well, that is what the Republican Party has become. And what they are fearing and hating are protesters. I write, we see it in institutionalized police violence against African Americans, on the part of our police across the United States against immigrants by ICE. We see it in excessive arrests and punishments for people protesting Trump's inauguration and speeches. We see it in new laws punishing journalists for reporting on things like factory farms and environmental abuses. We see it in Trump's violence-tinged rhetoric against Mexican rapists, using MS-13 as a rhetorical proxy for Hispanics, saying that NFL players hate and disrespect our flag, things like that. So we're up to four. I've got this list here that I compiled over the weekend. More after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How democracies die. Stick around. And welcome back. Amazing. This, by the way, there's just another Another incredible story here. The Pentagon apparently, now, you know, there's a couple of stories about this, but the first is from Lawrence Kotlikoff, who is a contributor to Forbes magazine, right? Capitalism here, right? We love capitalism. He writes, on July 26th of last year, the Office of the Inspector General, that's the OIG, issued a report, quote, titled Army General Funds Adjustments Not Adequately Documented or Supported. The report indicates that for the fiscal year 2015, that's 1 year, the Army failed to provide adequate support for $6.5 trillion in journal voucher adjustments. According to the GAO's Comptroller General, quote, journal vouchers are summary-level accounting adjustments made when balances between systems cannot be reconciled. Often these journal vouchers are unsupported, meaning they lack supporting documentation to justify the adjustment or are not tied to specific accounting transactions. For an auditor, journal vouchers are a red flag that transactions are not being captured, reported, or summarized correctly. So the entire Army budget in fiscal 2015 was $120 billion. But they can't account for $5.6 trillion. This is because of the Defense Department's, quote, failure to correct system deficiencies. An appendix to the July 2016 report shows that $2 trillion in changes, the Army General Fund balance sheet, were due to unsupported adjustments. So, you know, bottom line here is it looks like the Defense Department might have spent as much as $21 trillion since 1998 that we don't know about, and they don't know where it went, which is really strange, right? Where did that money go? Where did that money, I mean, $21 trillion, the GDP of the entire country is $15 to $16 trillion a year. The budget of the United States is just under $3 trillion a year. And the Pentagon has spent $21 trillion in the last 19 years that they can't account for. Or 20 years, I guess it would be, since 1998. This is 2018. Where did that money go? Or did it go? Or is this like, this is how bad their accounting is? I mean, it's time to audit the Pentagon. It's time to figure out what's going on. You know, we all saw, you know, when George W. Bush lied us into the war in Iraq, you know, one of the first things that happened was they started shipping in literally pallets of $100 bills, some $6 to $10 billion in pallets of money, and started passing that money out to the preferred Iraqis, the Iraqis who, you know, were going to help us rebuild the country. Right? And the money is unaccountable for. I mean, this is an amount of money, the physical cash that you could see from outer space, and we can't find it. But 21 trillion? There's something funky going on here. And let's hope this is an accounting problem and that there's an offsetting 21 trillion someplace. You know, if it's in the credit column, it has to be in the debit column, right? What's on the other side of that double entry bookkeeping? I don't know. Anyhow, we'll be back with our list of how the government gets taken over by neo-fascists. Stick around. Welcome back. This hour of our program brought to you by Harrys.com. Okay, back to our list of how authoritarians seize power in a republic or a democracy or whatever, you know, all of the above. Number whatever we're up to now. Scapegoat minority groups to rile up a mob mentality. This is, you know, one of the sad legacies that we carry from other mammals, and you see this in particular, we're all familiar with it with dogs, is this pack mentality. Particularly when an animal is weak or wounded, the pack will turn on it. Now, you could argue that this is, and in fact, you know, an evolutionary biologist would, this is something that, you know, in evolutionary history actually helps survival of the fittest, right? But, and typically we override that with our cognitive processes, our thinking processes, but it's still right at our core. So when white politicians and police used this mob mentality against Native Americans and slaves in the first 100 years of the existence of this country, and then in the 1880s with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1886, we used it against Chinese immigrants. You know, we look back on those times and say, you know, that was pretty terrible. Trump is doing this right now. He is resurrecting this create the pack, create the mob against immigrant children, against women broadly, against religious and racial minorities, particularly Muslims and African Americans, and against gay people, well, the entire LGBTQ community. When I was researching this article over the weekend, I typed in the words libtard and Heather Heyer. If you type that into a search engine, it will blow your mind what you see. Heather Heyer was the woman who was murdered by Trump's very fine people in Charlottesville, Virginia. Okay, next. Elevate one religion you can control and reward while trashing others. Another trick that authoritarians use. The one exception to this, by the way, are the communist countries. But, you know, after World War II, I thought one of the most interesting suicides after World War II was the Reichsbishop, Ludwig Müller. He had been elevated. Hitler put him basically in charge of the German church. And, you know, authoritarian leaders almost always use members of minority religions as scapegoats, and then they reward their friends who are members of the majority religion. And I talk about how George Herbert Walker Bush, he brought in a guy, an ex-alcoholic, black sheep in the family, who had been saved by Christianity and become an evangelical. Brought this guy in to help run the religious connection to the George Herbert Walker Bush campaign in 1988. His name was George W. Bush. This is how they do it. Thomas Jefferson had some thoughts on that. I'll share those with you after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we can talk about, you know, if I'm missing anything here, let me know what you think. You know, what are the main signals, the main hallmarks of authoritarian takeovers? In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from In Praise of Wasting Time by Alan Lightman. Not long ago, this is from chapter 1, A Village in Cambodia. Not long ago, I found myself in a small village in a remote area of Cambodia. Many rural areas in the world have modern plumbing, electric ovens, satellite TVs, and other such technological conveniences, but not this one. The inhabitants of Tramong Trum live in one-room huts without electricity or running water. Dangling light bulbs in the huts are powered by car batteries. Food is cooked over open fires. The villagers support themselves by growing rice, watermelons, and cucumbers. Their religion is a version of moderate Islam called Imam San Cham, combined with animism. When someone needs healing, the villagers perform a ceremony in which they summon the spirits of ancestors, monkeys, and horses. The ghosts inhabit the bodies of the villagers, who dance wildly through the night. Other than these moments, the villagers go about their lives in quiet calm. They rise with the sun. After breakfast, they herd their cows out for grazing, then walk to the rice fields and tend to their crops. They return to their huts as the light starts to dim and gather firewood for cooking the evening meal. Each morning, the women ride their bicycles on a rutted red dirt road to a market 10 miles away to trade for goods and food they cannot grow themselves. Through a translator, I asked one of the women how long the daily trip took. She gave me a puzzled look and said, "I never thought about that." I was startled at her disinterest in time and envious. We in the developed world have created a frenzied lifestyle in which not a minute is to be wasted. The precious 24 hours of each day are carved up, dissected, and reduced to 10-minute units of efficiency. We become agitated and angry in the waiting room of a doctor's office if we've been sitting for 10 minutes or more. We grow impatient if our laser printers don't spit out at least 5 pages per minute. And we must be connected to the grid at all times. We take our smartphones and laptops with us on vacation. We go through our email at restaurants or our online bank accounts while walking in the park. The teenagers I know and some of their parents check their smartphones at least every 5 minutes in their free waking hours. At night, many sleep with their phones on their chests or next to their beds. When the school day ends, our children are loaded with piano lessons and dance classes and soccer games and extra language classes. Our university curricula are so crammed that our young people don't have time to digest and reflect on the material they're supposed to be learning. I plead guilty myself. If I take the time to examine my own 24 hours per day, here's what I find. From the instant I open my eyes in the morning until I turn out the lights at night, I'm working on some project. First thing in the morning, I check my email. For any unsuspecting opening of time that appears during the day, I rush to patch it as if it's a tear in my trousers. I find a project. Indeed, I feel compelled to find a project to fill up the hole. If I have an extra hour, I can work at my laptop on an article or class lesson. If I have a few minutes, I can answer a letter or read an online news story. With only seconds, I can check phone messages. Unconsciously, without thinking about it, I've subdivided my day into smaller and smaller units of efficient time use until there are no holes left, no breathing spaces left. I rarely goof off. I rarely follow a path that I think might lead to a dead end. I rarely waste time. And certainly I would never ever spend a couple of hours of each day going to the market without knowing exactly how long the trip took and figuring out how to listen to an audiobook on the way. It's not only me. All around me, I feel a sense of urgency, a very vague fear of not being plugged in, a fear of not keeping up. I feel like Joseph K. in Kafka's The Trial, who lives in a world of ubiquitous suspicion and powerful but invisible authority. Yet there's no authority here, only a pervasive mentality. I can remember a time when I did not live in this way. I can remember those days of my childhood when I would slowly walk home from school by myself and take long detours through the woods. With the silence broken only by the sound of my own footsteps, I would follow turtles as they lumbered down a dirt path. Where were they going and why? I don't know. I would build play forts out of fallen trees. I would sit on the banks of Cornfield Pond and waste hours watching tadpoles in the shallows or the sway of water grasses in the wind. My mind meandered. I thought about what I wanted for dinner that night, whether God was a man or a woman, whether tadpoles knew they were destined to become frogs, or what it would feel like to be dead, what I wanted to be when I became a man, that fresh bruise on my knee. When the light began fading, I wandered home. I asked myself, what happened to those careless, wasteful hours at the pond? How has the world changed? 1 minute. Of course, part of the answer is that I simply grew up. Adulthood undeniably brings responsibilities and career pressures and a certain awareness of the weight of life. Yet that is only part of what has happened. Indeed, an enormous transformation has occurred in the world from the 1950s and 60s of my youth to today. A transformation so vast that it has altered all that we say and do and think, yet often in ways so subtle and ubiquitous we're hardly aware of them. Among other things, the world today is faster, more scheduled, more fragmented, less patient, louder, more wired, more public. For want of a better phrase, I will call this world the wired world. By this term, I do not mean only digital communication, the internet and social media. I also mean the frenzied pace and noise of the world. There are many different aspects of today's time-driven wired existence, but they are connected. All can be traced to recent technological advances and economic prosperity in a complex web of cause and effect. Throughout history, the pace of life has always been fueled by the speed of communication. In praise of wasting time. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, I was mentioning using religion. This is one of the things that autocrats and authoritarians use is religion. And there's this new project. It's called Project Blitz. This new organization that is like the Catherine Stewart wrote about it in the New York Times this weekend, and it's like a Christian version of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, where funded by the Koch brothers and others, that gets together lobbyists and legislators, state legislators, a couple times a year, and the lobbyists write legislation for their particular industries that they would like, and they give it to the legislators, and the legislators take it back to their particular state legislature and introduce it. Well, this is the same thing, only for Christians. And they've already introduced over 70 pieces of state legislation based on what so-called Christians want. The one in Oklahoma, for example, allows agencies that participate in adoptions to discriminate in those adoptions based on race, gender, sex, religion, whatever you want. In Minnesota, it's letting schools post "In God We Trust" signs in their classrooms, something the Supreme Court has already said you can't do. 1786, Thomas Jefferson was living in France. He was our envoy to France. Madison had just put together the Constitution. Jefferson had demanded that there be a Bill of Rights attached to it, and in fact wrote the First Amendment. And then he sent, on August 13th of that year of 1786, he wrote this long letter to Judge George Wythe, who was a Virginia judge. And he had been one of Jefferson's teachers when he was a teenager. George Wythe had, literally taught him law. He was a mentor and a teacher. And so Jefferson writes him this letter and says, "Our act for freedom of religion is extreme." Now, keep in mind, this, David Barton is one of the guys behind this new Project Blitz, which he said, quote, "It's kind of like whack-a-mole for the other side. It'll drive them crazy that they'll have to divide their resources out in opposing this." In other words, they're going to throw so much legislation at so many state legislatures that something's going to slip through, right? So this is what Jefferson thought about people like David Barton and the modern-day Republican Party. He's in France. The word in all the newspapers is about the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. And he says, "Our act for freedom of religion is extremely applauded. The ambassadors and ministers of the several nations of Europe resident at this court have asked of me copies of it to send to their sovereigns, and it is inserted at full length in several books now in the press, among others the new French encyclopedia. I think it will produce considerable good, even in these countries where ignorance, superstition, poverty, and oppression of body and mind in every form are so firmly settled on the mass of the people that the redemption from them can never be hoped. If anyone thinks that kings, nobles, or priests are good conservators of the public happiness, send him here. It is the best school in the universe to cure him of that folly. He will see here with his own eyes that these descriptions of men are an abandoned confederacy against the happiness of the mass of the people." Jefferson went on to say that the people of France have been loaded with misery by nobles and priests, and by them alone. He continues in the article, in his letter to George Wythe, and then references Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which gives Congress the power to raise money by imposing taxes and use that money to provide for the general welfare of the people. And he says, "Preach, my dear sir, a crusade against ignorance. Establish and improve the law for educating the common people." Here's Jefferson calling for fully paid public education. He's got to be looking at Betsy DeVos right now and rolling over in his grave. He said, "Let our countrymen know that the people alone can protect us against these evils, and that the tax which will be paid for this purpose is not more than the 1,000th part of what will be paid to kings, priests, and nobles who will rise up among us if we leave the people in ignorance. But it needs but half an eye to see, when among them, that the foundation is laid in their dispositions for the establishment of a despotism." He's talking about religion in France. Okay, next one. "Co-opt and make institutions of military and police power into loyal sycophants." This is like creating your own Praetorian Guard. From attacking the NFL players who are protesting police violence against unarmed black people, to telling a crowd of police officers not to be professional or arrest people when they're arresting them, to chest thumping about our military as the most powerful ever. Trump doesn't even try to be subtle about these threats. The next step, if he follows this well-worn authoritarian path, will be to put on Saddam Hussein-style military parades in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, the process that Ronald Reagan began and Newt Gingrich sped up in 1996 with his 1033 program of redirecting billions of dollars of military funds, hardware, and training to police departments begins the process of turning ordinary police agencies into Praetorian guards to solidify the power of the now captured state. And finally, in that category, exempting police unions from crackdowns on other government employee union activities, like Scott Walker did in Wisconsin, speeds up the process of ensuring the loyalty of the one legally armed, duty-sworn agency of government, the police. The next, ignore competence and incompetence, only loyalty matters. You know, people, even mainstream Republicans, I mean, you see, George Will on TV going, Ben Carson running a major agency? Really? Betsy DeVos running a major agency? Wilbur Ross running a major agency? These people are not competent. And then you've got the guys like Ryan Zinke, Scott Pruitt, and Mick Mulvaney, who seem to be anti-competent. They're very good at getting things done, but what they're getting done is destroying the agencies that they're supposed to be running. How can this be? Well, really what this is all about is shifting the power in America away from government protections for consumers, workers, and voters and citizens, and toward giving such power to the billionaire and corporate class. And the key to the whole thing is loyalty. In 2016, Trump introduced a raised arm loyalty oath in his campaign rallies in 2016. And Glenn Beck said on ABC television, quote, "We all look at Adolf Hitler in 1940. We should begin to look at Hitler in 1929. Donald Trump is a dangerous man with the things he's been saying." That was Glenn Beck. Trump's obsessive need for loyalty, the result of a lifetime of insecurity and unethical, illegal business practices, are spreading through government institutions like the EPA and the Department of Defense the way a fungus spreads through a bag of apples on a warm day. And then we see all these kiss-up, kick-down people, from his doctor to Ryan Zinke, and the flag that Zinke requires being flying over his office. Next, foster a sense of helplessness among the opposition, whether it's done with selective and brutal enforcement of the law, subtly shutting down access to the media, or outright infiltration. Destroying the opposition is a key to seizing and holding authoritarian power. When I was a teenager, it was Richard Nixon, and our local Students for a Democratic Society (SDS) chapter in East Lansing had been infiltrated by both the Michigan State Police and the FBI. And the guy who was always yelling "kill the pigs" and burn down the ROTC building, he was one of the guys from the Michigan State Police Department. But it wasn't just the infiltration. We all knew that this guy was a cop, right? Or we all guessed it. But what happens is that the presence of the infiltrator disheartens everybody else, causes people not to want to join the organization. And of course, at that time, I mean, this was 1968, JFK was murdered, MLK was murdered, RFK was murdered, the Panthers were being taken down, and other nonviolent groups. What that does is it disheartens the opposition. And then you look at, the insane, 10 years in federal prison that over 200 people who were arrested during the Trump inauguration were all facing under a conspiracy to riot charge. 10-year felonies for going out in the streets and protesting Trump. This is how they do it in Turkey, right? This is how they do it in these authoritarian countries. Fear and a sense of powerlessness or resignation are two of an authoritarian regime's most powerful weapons. The next is defeating neo-fascism, neo-authoritarianism, incorporate billionaire corruption. Well, this is the good news, right? This is where we get to the good news. I'm going to wrap up with this. There was an amazing study published by Maria Steffen, who's the Director of Educational Initiatives at the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, and Erica Chenoweth, Assistant Professor of Government at Wesleyan University and a postdoc at Harvard. It's called Why Civil Resistance Works. It was published in 2008. And, I've talked before about Thorstein Veblen, and this whole concept from about 100 years ago that there's this influencer class that's about 20% of the population, and if you can convince 20% of the population of something, then they become the ones who influence the rest of the population, and it spreads through the population. Well, there may be some truth to that, but we've all been working on this 20% model for literally my entire lifetime. Turns out the percentage of people that you need to not just convince, but actually get to engage in action that is visible is 3.5%. If you can get 3.5% of the people to show up, to physically show up, you can flip an entire country. And this is how the Koch brothers and their buddies flipped the Republican Party. They got 3.5% of Americans. That's about 1.1 million people. Right? They got, well, we've got 300 million people, roughly, in the United States. 3% of that, no, that would be 9 million people, wouldn't it? Yeah, around 10 million people, I guess. Be 3%. 10 million, yeah, 10 million people. So, oh geez, I've got to correct my article then. So if we can get 10 million people active, then things change. If only 3.5% of the population engaged in peaceful, nonviolent, persistent protest. And by the way, nonviolence is effective 53% of the time. Violence is only effective 7% of the time. So, the fact that nonviolence can be successful is a really, really big deal. And one that we need to take very, very seriously. So anyhow, we'll pick up your calls on your thoughts on this and everything else when we come back from the break. Stick around. It's coming up on 46 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Yes, we are live. And, back from Memorial Day holiday, we'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Carol, watching us on Free Speech TV in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'd like to join the discussion on Trump's authoritarian takeover of our democracy.
Go for it.
Okay. The best analogy I've seen or heard is the one that Milton Meyer wrote in his book, They Thought They Were Free.
Yes.
And I can relate to that because I grew up in a fairly rural area, and we used to love to watch the corn grow. Mm-hmm. And you'd run through the fields, with the corn through the rows. And after a while, you thought, it's never going to get big. It's never going to hide me down here. And after a while, it's over your head, and you can get lost.
Yeah, and that was that quote from that college professor that spoke with Milton Meyer.
Yes, and that's exactly the analogy that works for me. He's doing this so deliberately, so effectively, that after a while, you're lost, and you don't even realize what happened.
Yeah. That's
what I'm afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. It concerns me tremendously, and I think your analysis is spot on. Carol Wells said, thank you very much for the call. Tazio in Ithaca, New York. How do I say your name? Hello? Watching Free Speech TV in Ithaca? Okay. I'm putting him back on hold. He's on line 2, Arthur, if you want to check that out. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, corruption has spoiled everything. The media system is totally corrupt. I recently had a conversation with a person who is a Trump person, and it's very hard to, come to any kind of cohesion in the argument because, they have a totally different take on everything, and they have all of these bizarre sources. He was talking about Hillary Clinton, and so it's. I think that is what they are actually trying to do, and then we have a political breakdown also. And once you have a political breakdown, then the next step is somebody to step in, and that's what's happened in the past. And it's, unique to each situation, but I think that that's what we're going to see is we're going to get to a point where there's a complete political breakdown. And one more point about money being spent on national defense, particularly secret operations and whatnot, you can't account for it. And the more that becomes part of the budget where nobody can talk about it, the more that there's no accountability, because that's part of the secrecy of it. It's against the law to really account for what it is that they're doing. It's just a black hole in the budget.
Yeah, but $21 trillion over a 20-year period, that's jaw-dropping.
Yep, it is, but this is the price of secrecy, and this portion of the budget keeps growing because people think that we need to have secrecy when it comes to all of these decisions, and it is part of, and then also people make a lot of money off of that. It's probably going into the pockets of a lot of people in Langley, Virginia, who are making a fortune off of it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. John, thanks a lot for the call. And good talking with you. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Tazio in Ithaca, New York. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah, my relatives downstate, they call me Tazio. My friends up here, they call me Tazio. So,
okay, all right. So what's up, Tazio?
I called in when you're talking about, just before you're talking about rewarding loyalty and ignoring a competence, so this sort of fits in with that. I want to tell you about an article I read about ICE taking away children from their mothers at the border when they try and cross. They're like, 18-month-old, 2-month-old children. And I was wondering when I was reading it, why would any human being take a 18-month-old child away from their mother? It doesn't make any sense. It's just because they were told to. They were following orders. And that's the defense that they used at Nuremberg. So I just thought that might be another sign of the impending tyranny. I don't know what you call it, but another Gestapo. So that's my point. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure. And it's an excellent point, Tazio. Thank you. Very well said. EK in Lake Zurich, Illinois, if I'm saying it right.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Trump's position right now in terms of his electability. And I think his favorable lead rating and all that.
EK, say that again. Your phone faded out there for a minute, and I missed half your sentence. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
Can you say again what you just said? Your phone faded out. I missed half your sentence.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Please, EK, I'm going to put you on hold. Your phone is fading in and out, and maybe Arthur can work it out with you. Tim in Los Angeles. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm calling about, I think we should have a tax revolt, and I think we should do it as a form of protest. And the way you do that is everybody takes their money and they put it in the bank, the money they're going to pay on taxes. And then on April the 15th, the government simply doesn't get the money that they're expecting, or a large proportion of it doesn't show up. And it's just a way of, I think it'll appeal to the right and the left. I think it's a way of pointing out to them, you work for us,
Yeah, you know, I've heard this song before, Tim, and it doesn't work. There have been historically a small number of people who are tax protesters in the United States. Very often they end up in jail. There are scam artists who promote this very aggressively to people who should be in jail, and it just, you know, it's not going to happen. What we need to do is get people registered to vote and out there, you know, active and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, it's kind of step-by-step stuff. It's not rocket science. Steve in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Oh, sorry. I was just eating some food.
That's okay, Steve. I learned this in waiter school, right? As soon as you eat, I ask a question. What's up?
Yes, I just want to see, what did you think of Elon Musk's recent tweets, kind of, you know, talking about the media?
Yeah. I think that I'm not going to buy a Tesla. And in fact, last Friday, I think it was, you know, I told this whole story about how we were trying to buy a Chevy Volt and we gave up on it. I went out and I bought a Toyota Prius, plug-in Prius. And I'm, you know, when what do you call it, Musk and Tesla came out with the, you know, the Model 3, the affordable version, I thought, oh, that might be interesting. You know, that'd be fun. And you know, Louise and I actually put ourselves on that list 2 years ago. But I notified Tesla over the weekend, please take me off the list. I have no interest in buying your car. Because your CEO is, you know, he started this thing called Pravda, right? It's like, the Russian word for truth.
Isn't that really cool that we can hold journalists accountable?
I don't think it's really cool that a billionaire who doesn't like what journalists are saying about him is going to, quote, hold them accountable, end quote.
Oh, no, it's not what they were saying about him that he doesn't like. It's that they were reporting stuff wrong.
It's that they're reporting what?
It's that they were just reporting stuff wrong in general. He wasn't talking about the ones that are aggressive or saying bad stuff about him. He was just talking about the ones who just report complete crap.
People who say that they're here to hold the media accountable always say that, you know, we're not just holding the media accountable about the things that we care about. But typically that's at the top of the list. And, you know, media accountability.
He once told everyone accountable.
You know, I don't think so. I think Elon Musk has turned into basically an immigrant version of Donald Trump. I mean, you know, we were all celebrating him when he was the South African who came to the United States and helped make eBay rich and became a billionaire through eBay, and then started a car company and started a tunnel company and started a rocket company. He's doing all this cool stuff, and we all just loved it. Oh, it's the American success story. And now he's going after our media. And he's not going after the fake media. He's not going after social media. He's not going after places where you know, fake media resides. You don't know, Steve. We have no idea what this thing is that he's rolled out. All we know is what he said. And I'm just like, you know, I'm over it. I mean, I'm part of the media. This whole thing of, you know, we've got to have media accountability is nonsense. I mean, it's just it's nonsense. I'm not going there, and I'm not interested in going there with Elon Musk either, frankly. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. We're hitting the top of the hour here. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. We're going to have a couple of guests a little later on today. Congressman Darren Soto is going to drop by in about 30 minutes. And Jeff Cohen will be with us in about an hour and a half, our old friend, with actually. Fairness and accuracy in reporting. Speaking of media oversight, we'll talk to Jeff about that. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, We the People, A Call to Take Back America, which was published back in 2004. This was during the Bush administration. It's an illustrated nonfiction book, and this is from the chapter titled They're Back, page 84. Today the conservatives are set to complete what the railroad barons pushed the Grant administration to start. That would have been in the 1880s, to take democracy and its institutions of governance, which the founders fought and died for, from the hands of humans, citizens, and voters. They're handing control to the very types of monopolistic corporations the founders fought against when they led the Tea Party revolt against the East India Company in Boston Harbor in 1773. In June of 2003, despite protests from millions of Americans, corporate-friendly Michael Powell's FCC lifted some of the last tattered restrictions on media ownership, allowing absolute concentration of the voices we hear into a tiny number of corporate hands. On another front, a major multinational corporation has claimed the right to deceive people in its PR as its First Amendment right to free speech. The New York Times Corporation editorialized in support. Even the ACLU, unable to see the forest for the trees, adopted a misguided advocacy seeking to preserve First Amendment rights, even for corporations who don't legitimately warrant them. In addition, as much as half the federal workforce is slated to be replaced by corporate workers under a new Bush edict. Keep in mind this was 2004. Government, which doesn't have constitutional human rights of privacy and so is answerable to we the people, will then, once big chunks of government are privatized, will then be able to use Fourth Amendment rights of privacy to hide what those workers do and how they do it from the prying eyes of citizens and voters. In a similar fashion, corporate-owned and thus unaccountable to the people voting machines are being installed nationwide. In the last election, these machines often produced vote results so different from exit polls that pollsters who have been successfully calling elections for over 50 years threw their hands up and closed shop. And in the ultimate irony, the man in charge of the Bush administration's economic policy, Secretary of Treasury John Snow, is a multimillionaire campaign contributor, chairman of the Business Roundtable, an elite core of 100 of the nation's most powerful corporate CEOs, and himself a railroad baron. It's a sorry state of affairs, and it shouldn't be that way. Corporations are created by humans to further the goal of making money. And as engineer, architect, and writer Buckminster Fuller said in his brilliant essay, Grunch of Giants, corporations are neither physical nor metaphysical phenomena. They are socioeconomic ploys, legally enacted game playing. Corporations are non-living, non-breathing legal fictions. They feel no pain. They don't need clean water to drink, fresh air to breathe, healthy food to consume. They can live forever. They can't be put in prison. They can change their identity or appearance in a day. They can change their citizenship in an hour. They can rip off parts of themselves and create entirely new entities. Some have compared corporations to robots in that they are human creations that can outlive individual humans, performing their assigned tasks forever. Scientist and prolific author Isaac Asimov, when considering a world where robots had become as functional and intelligent as, and more powerful than, their human creators, posited 3 fundamental laws that would determine the behavior of such potentially dangerous human-made creations. His 3 laws of robotics stipulated that non-living creations must obey humans and never behave in a way that would harm humans. In some famous fictional scenarios, we see the consequences of letting human creations operate without adequate restrictions or limitations. In Arthur C. Clarke's 2001, the onboard computer HAL seizes control of the spaceship from the humans therein. The Terminator film series depicts a time when human-built machines wage war against humanity itself. And in the Matrix films, machines use humans much as we now use them. Asimov's idea was profound, but not altogether original, of course. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison beat him to it by about 200 years with an idea that a constitutional amendment was needed to ensure that the reach of corporations was limited. Something seems to have slipped since then. Until 1886, it was a felony in most states for corporations to give money to politicians or otherwise try, through either lobbying or advertising, to influence elections. Such activity was called bribery and influencing. And the reason it was banned was simple. Corporations can't vote, so what are they doing in politics? And numerous additional laws were passed to restrain corporations from involvement in politics during the era of President Teddy Roosevelt, who said there can be no effective control of corporations while their political activity remains. In Wisconsin, for example, the penalty for any corporate official violating the law and getting cozy with politicians on behalf of the corporation was 5 years in prison and a substantial fine. Prior to 1886, corporations were referred to in U.S. law as artificial persons, similar to the way Star Trek portrays a human-looking robot named Data. Like Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, state laws like that of Wisconsin prevented corporations from harming humans while still allowing people to create their robots, their corporations, and use them to make money. The Wisconsin law said no corporation doing business in this state shall pay or contribute or offer consent or agree to pay or contribute directly or indirectly any money, property, free service of its officers, employees, or thing of value to any political party, organization, committee, or individual for any political purpose whatsoever. We the people. Going of profits to the company. This is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you on the subject of Trump lying, which is sort of one of the, it was the first point in my How Authoritarians Take Power that I mentioned in the last hour. Billy Bush had a really interesting conversation with Bill Maher back in March of this year that is recounted by Eric Wemple in today's Washington Post. And Trump, I mean, Trump is a blabbermouth, right? Yeah, I mean, Trump bragged to Leslie Stahl that the reason that he attacks the media is so when the media reports on something he's done that would reflect poorly on him, people won't believe what they say because he's pre-conditioned people not to believe the media when they talk about him. And so this is what Billy Bush said about his conversation with Donald Trump in the bus. This is the part that didn't get played on the air. Billy Bush said this to Bill Maher on Bill Maher's show Real Time. He said, well, Trump has been saying he's #1 forever, right? Finally, I'd had enough. I said, wait, Donald, hold it. Wait a minute. You haven't been #1 for 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is. He's talking about the television ratings for Apprentice. For whatever it is. Not in any category, not in any demo. Trump goes, well, did you see last Thursday? Last Thursday, 18 to 49, last 5 minutes. I said, no, I don't know that stat. So he was like, I told you. And then later when the cameras were off, he says, Billy, look, you just tell them and they believe it. That's it. You just tell them and they believe it. They just do. And I said, okay. This is his strategy. I mean, this is quite literally Trump's principal strategy in communicating or in defining political realities is to lie to us, to lie to his own people, to lie to the media. This whole thing of, you know, these lies. I mean, there's not another word for them other than lies. And it's something that actually works for him. And it's not anything new. Franklin Roosevelt talked about this back in 1944. He was running for re-election as president, and during the campaign, he said there's been something new introduced. It's foreign. Well, here's Franklin Roosevelt sharing his thoughts with all of us.
According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood. Always a big one. For its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
See, there you go. And I mean, this is literally what this guy's been doing. And well, in fact, here, this is the longer clip in context where FDR actually lays it out, where it started.
The opposition in this year has already imported into this campaign a very interesting thing because it's foreign.
It's a very interesting thing because it's foreign that the Republicans have imported into the 1944 presidential campaign. He continues.
They have imported the propaganda technique invented by the dictators abroad. Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself.
There you go. And you know, he goes on to say, I've played the rest of the clip before, you know, never tell a small lie when a big one will do. I mean, it's right there. It's, you know, it's very straightforward. This is what Trump does. So then the question is, you know, how do you deal with this? Because the problem with dealing with a liar is that when lies get repeated, as Goebbels suggested they should be, when lies get repeated, they get believed, ultimately, simply by virtue of repetition. Every time you hear something, you have to create a mental image of it. If I say elephant, 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 eventually you're thinking elephants. Right? This is why George Lakoff titled his book, Don't Think of an Elephant. If I say, don't think of an elephant, you know, there's not really an elephant. There's no elephant in Portland. There's no elephants anywhere in Portland. There's no elephant crossing the bridge on I-5. There's no, you know, there's no elephants swimming in the Columbia River or the Willamette. There's no elephants anywhere. How many pictures of elephants do you now have in your mind? And if that keeps getting repeated over and over and over again, at some point you're going to start thinking, geez, I wonder if the circus came to town and the elephants got loose. What's the deal? This is serious stuff. These are real strategies. Niccolo Machiavelli laid a lot of this out back in, what, the 15th or 16th century in Italy, in his book, The Prince, which was originally a job application. Basically, he wanted to be the guy who was going to help the prince become a successful prince. And he laid out these strategies. In fact, back, I don't know, geez, 10 years ago or so on this program, I went through Machiavelli's book, chapter by chapter, on the air. Maybe it's time to do it again. It's pretty astonishing what's going on. Curtis in Los Angeles. Hey, Curtis, you wanted to weigh in on Trump's lies? What's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Tom. Good to speak with you, and hope you had a good Memorial weekend holiday.
Thank you. I did.
Well, I'm not sure if you are fully aware, but I'm running for Congress out here in the 23rd District. I kind of touched on it a few times over the years, and you'd always told me that it would be impossible to beat Kevin McCarthy, and that may well be so, but I still cannot stand still and watch what I'm seeing before my eyes, because this is nothing short of the re-rise of the Third Reich. This taking of children at borders, I mean, this is the same party that doesn't like welfare. They don't like preschool. They don't like free food for children in schools. I mean, they do everything. They love the fetus and hate the child. So I don't understand why they are taking people's babies and children away at the border and separating these families.
Curtis, did you ever see the movie Sophie's Choice?
No, I heard about it after the that correspondence dinner when the comedian made some reference about
Michelle Wolf. I am guessing that it's on Netflix. I haven't looked to make sure, but I'm guessing it's probably available on Netflix or Hulu or someplace. It should be available. And it's an amazing movie about this Jewish mother with 2 children who gets captured in Nazi Germany and ultimately gets taken to the death camps. and has to choose which child is going to stay with her and which child is going to go off to be gassed immediately. And it's an absolutely, for a week after I watched that movie, Louise and I were living in Vermont at the time, so it must have been in the late 90s. And when that movie came out, for a week afterwards, I did not sleep well. I mean, it so affected me. And that's what these mothers are facing, these horrible, horrible situations where their children are literally being torn from their arms.
Right, and so I'm trying to ask myself, what is the ends to the mean here? What are they trying to accomplish by separating
this is the degradation and brutalization of society. It's the use of minorities, in this case Hispanics, as a weapon. You know, it's the trashing of them for political purposes, and it's purely for political purposes. Let's not call it anything other than it is. This is a policy that Jeff Sessions has put into place. Yes, it's been legal all along, but you know, there's lots of things that are legal that the government doesn't do because they're brutal and unnecessary, and then this certainly falls into that category. Curtis, what's your website?
I'm under Kurt for Congress 2018, and that's Kurt with a K-U-R-T FORCONGRESS 2018.com.
Okay.
I also have a GoFundMe page and a Act Blue page. And I'll tell you right now, Tom, I've been listening to you for 10 years straight, and I think you know that I almost met you back in 2008, and that's when I became a fan of Air America and also Progressive Radio. I didn't get a chance to shake your hand, but you've been an influence on me for the past 10 years, and every time you've said, get out there and get active, I used to be a sports player, football player, and I know what it takes to get active and get into the game. And so I've modeled my campaign after most of what I've learned from you.
That's great. Curtis, we're out of time, but thank you, and good luck in your run for Congress. Keep us up to date on how you're doing. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's actually coming up on 16 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be back. And welcome back. Johnny, watching Free Speech TV in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I believe King Henry VIII, who his heyday was in like the 1530s, 1520s, he made reference to Machiavelli. So I'm guessing mid or early 16th century for Machiavelli.
Yeah, it's in my recollection too. But anyway.
I have a combination suggestion and technical question that you might be able to add to. One or two of your callers earlier brought up this disturbing news about border guards, not just separating children, but now getting the okay, I guess, to separate infants from their immigrant mothers, and then at a later time, perhaps in a courtroom, defending themselves by saying they were just following orders, hearkening to Nuremberg. So my thought is, how about we short-circuit this process now before the weeds overtake the lawn? And the way to do that, I'm thinking, and you can comment on this, is to recruit a number of journalists and reporters to volunteer their time to follow and interview, not interfere with, but follow and interview a number of border guards as well as their supervisors after hours when they're going home or coming from home, and talking to them, getting them on record, having the general public participate at some point on the street, on the go.
I think, Johnny, if you were to try that you could be charged with the crime of interfering with a federal official or a police officer in the course of their duty, or if they're off-duty, harassment. I don't think that's the way to go.
Well, if we're not allowed to break and enter and steal draft cards, if we're not allowed to do anything that might be considered reasonable in unreasonable times, I don't see what's the point at all of doing anything.
Well, what's reasonable about breaking and entering?
Breaking and entering a facility that has draft records.
Right. Oh, I see what you're doing. Well, you're talking about, nonviolent resistance. What you're talking about are specific actions that are designed to get a person arrested.
And my response back is journalists asking civil questions. That's not violent.
Yeah, you know, I get what you're saying, Johnny, and I think that, you know, there's probably a fair number of people who are working for ICE who are themselves not good people. You know, they're kind of Sheriff Bull Connor mentality. You know, hey, love to break a few heads. Kind of stuff, you know, especially this cop over the weekend who murdered this 18-year-old or 19 or 20-year-old, I guess, you know, just recently turned Guatemalan woman at the border because she was part of a crowd that, quote, rushed him, and now they're changing their, they've changed their tune a couple of times on this thing, but it's like, you know, the reality is that it's not the border agents that we need to worry about. You're always going to be able to find bad cops, and you're always going to find them showing up in police departments. You know, you do what you can about that, and you do it principally legislatively, which means that you need to change the rules, or the rulers, excuse me. You need to change the legislators. We need to get these fascists, essentially, out of power, you know, from the billionaires that control them to the individual politicians. And that means we need to get politically active, and we need to register to vote. We need to show up. Johnny, thanks for the call. Good talking with you. I'm sorry, I just can't endorse hassling ICE agents. You know, what we need to do is hassle politicians to change the rules under which ICE agents operate. Stick around. We'll be right back. The electric toothbrush Quip, Q-U-I-P, at getquip.com/Tom. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Well, hello, Tom. I don't know. I just think in response to what you've been talking about with how Trump's getting away with all this, in light of how many people across the country are opposed to the Trump machine. The machine needs to be crushed. Cut the wires. Bring about democracy through a generative, small business and land-based ecological revolution.
I'm with you, Bob. The problem that we've got right now is that Trump has embedded himself with the billionaire class. I mean, this is like
we're not billionaires.
Fritz Tyson.
We're not part of that.
Right. So therefore,
let's do what we are. That's what I want to encourage people to do.
Yeah.
Most of the people I think that support what you're saying and something different towards democracy are need shelter, water.
I understand the instinct, Bob. Louise and I, on a couple of different times in our lives, have sort of kind of gone back to the land. Bought houses way out in the middle of nowhere and built, put in big gardens and things like that.
But right in the middle of town.
Well, even in the middle of town, we've done that too, and tried to build community and things. But it, we're past that time, in my opinion, where kind of checking out and going your own way is a useful option.
No,
I think,
disagree.
Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree, Bob. I think that the time is for everybody to get politically involved, whether they got the money to buy a farm, whether they got the money to live off the land or not. And a lot of people, most people don't. We need to get politically involved. or get people politically involved in all of this kind of stuff. Rich in Sheridan, Wyoming. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I'd like to ask, do you think Trump is the Antichrist? And I'll take your comment off the broadcast.
Well, for someone to be an Antichrist, there has to be a Christ. And, you know, in other words, a figure that literally was sent here by a Bronze Age sky god to save us from our evil nature, which that same sky god invented in us. And that's a story that is embedded in Christianity, in the Christian catechism, that I have a hard time buying. You know, I love the things that Jesus said. I consider myself a follower of his sayings, and thus I call myself a Christian. But the idea that one unique God representing one particular unique group of people who he loves, specifically the Jews in Israel, you know, sent this guy to save absolutely everybody who had never even heard of him, makes no sense to me. And so if you can't have a Christ, literally, you can't have an Antichrist. So the net is, I don't think that Trump is the Antichrist. I don't think that there is an Antichrist. I think the Antichrist was a metaphor. I think when John wrote Revelation, or whoever subsequently edited Revelation, that what they had in mind was the power structure of Rome at the time, and that, you know, that's what they were talking about, frankly. So I don't know. Maybe you've got a different opinion, but Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Real quick, just to preface what my main topic, the great yogi Paramahansa Yogananda once stated that all the religions of the world are like the multicolored lamps of, you know, that's the only difference, that the lenses in the lamps are multicolored, but they're all lit by the same white light of one God.
Well, you could say that, you know, and I would say that one light, that one, you know, white light is whatever permeates the universe, and you can call that God if you want. I'm a little wary of that term, because most people translate that into you know, an old guy with a beard, this guy who makes decisions about things, and I don't buy into that.
The intention of the universe or whatever. But anyway, my main point is this Trump administration from the beginning has been media driven.
Oh, yeah.
If the media wanted to make amends with the American public for driving Trump to the White House, and then also letting the Russians and, you know, domestic criminals in Congress put him through the front door, then they would begin putting his face in a little 4-inch box down to the lower right-hand side of the screen on every main newscast during the week, just like they did to Bernie Sanders through the whole primary, every day of the week. And you have to admit, there was more energy in Bernie's rallies than any of them. But they cropped the crowds, and they put him in a little box down to the right-hand side of the screen.
When they covered him at all.
Yeah, and they didn't cover Hillary at all.
Yeah. Well, Hillary got more footage,
ago.
more than Bernie did, at least, you know, early on in the primary. But neither of them got anything close to the $2 billion worth of free publicity that Trump got, and he's continuing to get, by the way, from MSNBC and CNN. It's mind-boggling. Zach, thanks for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Bottom line is, yes, Trump understands the media, understands how to manipulate and control the media, and he's doing a very, very good job of it to the detriment of our country. Go ahead. It's the Thom Hartmann Reader. This particular chapter is an excerpt from my book, Peaceful Relationship, by the way, relationships between America and the countries of Europe. Then on September 3rd, 1940, he said, any device at all that suits the convenience of the president. Keep in mind, FDR was president, and the Republicans didn't want to fight against Hitler because they thought it would get FDR elected for a third term as a wartime president. That was what this was all about. Any device at all that suits the planet, talking about how we should not support England or Britain in their fight against Hitler, and how Hitler's a guy we can work with and all this sort of thing. If you saw the Churchill movie, Darkest Hour, this book will ring a lot of bells for you. It's out of print. There are used copies floating around. This is a copy my father gave me as a gift years ago. So, The Illustrious Dunderheads by Rex Stout. It's a collection of speeches, as I said. The first one is by George Bender, the Republican representative from Ohio. And this is July 11, 1940. I wish to call attention to the statement made by an expert, Colonel Lindbergh. Quote, "Let us not be confused by this talk of invasion by European aircraft. The air defense of America is as simple as the attack is difficult when the true facts are faced. We are in danger of a war today not because the European people have attempted to interfere with the internal affairs of America, but because American people have attempted to interfere with the internal affairs of Europe. Regardless of which side wins the war, there is no reason, aside from our own actions, to prevent a continuation of peaceful relationships between America and the countries of Europe." Then on September 3rd, 1940, he said, "Any device at all that suits the convenience of the president." Keep in mind, FDR was president, and the Republicans didn't want to fight against Hitler because they thought it would get FDR elected for a third term as a wartime president. That was what this was all about. "Any device at all that suits the convenience of the president is used in order to get us into this war by the back door. The power of peacetime conscription in the hands of an administration that is proved by its record to have used every conceivable excuse for regimenting America, overturning all tradition, and changing our form of government is nothing but an invitation to disaster. We know that our people hate everything that Hitler stands for. We despise dictatorship in any form, but I challenge anyone to tell us the difference between executive orders issued by Roosevelt and those issued by Hitler." Republicans in 1940. But wait, there's more. This is from Hamilton Fish, Republican representative from New York State. This is June 22nd, 1940. "Colonel Lindbergh was right when he said in one of his recent speeches, 'Let us stop this hysterical chatter about calamity and invasion that has been running rife these past few days. It is not fitting to the people who built this nation. The only reason we are in danger to becoming involved in this war is because there are powerful elements in America who desire to take part in a war against Hitler.'" And then on June 22nd, 1940, he gave a speech at the House of Representatives. He says, "Let us have an end to the secret diplomacy and the secret commitments of President Roosevelt that have brought ruin and disaster to France and from which we have escaped only by a miracle, and the will of the American people expressed through Congress to keep America out of war." This was the America First movement back then. "President Roosevelt alarmed the nation by his inflammatory Italian dagger thrust in the heart speech." And on August 5th, Republican Representative Hamilton Fish said, "Whom do we fear? Do we fear Hitler, who seems afraid to attack England over 20 miles of sea when he would have 3,000 miles to cross here? This is preposterous. Let us stop this fear hysteria." And then on September 3rd, he said on the floor of the House, Republican Representative Fish of New York, "Peacetime conscription in America is the direct road to Hitlerism, dictatorship, and National Socialism." See, he didn't want Roosevelt to start the draft. "If we adopt peacetime conscription, we are merely copying Nazi methods and ideology. Mr. Speaker, this Roosevelt Far Eastern policy of bluff and bluster has driven Japan into the hands of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. No one in Japan really wants war with the United States, but it's quite evident that this highly proud and militaristic nation has got tired of being threatened and slapped in the face by us. We must not let our sympathies run away with our judgment and involve us in any Asiatic war 10,000 miles away that has no connection to the defense of the American continent. We have more to fear from the war makers within our country than from our enemies without." Yeah, got more to fear from Franklin Roosevelt than from Adolf Hitler. This is from Claire Hoffman, Republican representative of Michigan. And this is from a speech that Mr. Hoffman gave September 7, 1940. "Mr. Speaker, down into the hell of a war, in no sense our war, this president would plunge us to satisfy his ambition to break the American tradition that no man should be elected a third time to the presidency, and in order that he may go down in history as America's first dictator." Yes, this is Republicans speaking on the floor of the House of Representatives, calling FDR a dictator in 1940. This is 1 year after Hitler had invaded Poland. Back to the quote. "He told us, in effect, that we had no national defense, that we were open to successful invasion by a foreign foe. Thus, he created fear and hysteria. As on other occasions, when he had satisfied his penchant for theatrics by shouting 'Fire, fire,' and calling Congress in special session at a cost of $500,000, he, figuratively speaking, now tucks his tongue in his cheek and goes off on a vacation. It is to be hoped on this one he will not, as he did on a prior occasion, see a mythical submarine. Roosevelt's threat to use the sovereignty of government is the threat of a Hitler, of a Mussolini, a Stalin, to silence all opposition and all criticism. He has consistently arrayed class against class, preached envy and jealousy, the doctrine of hatred and fear, and his egotism is only equaled by his ignorance when we assume that patriotic Americans will tamely submit. The illustrious Dunderheads. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, broadcasting on commercial radio stations from coast to coast on Sirius XM all across the North American continent, on Pacifica stations across America, Europe, and Africa, on American Forces Radio and every U.S. military base in the world, on your electronic device via TuneIn Progressive Voices in the Thom Hartmann app, and simulcast as television on Free Speech TV via the Dish Network, DirecTV, cable systems nationwide, and just this week, Free Speech TV also got added to Sling. If you're a cord cutter and you're getting your news from Sling, you can now see Free Speech TV there. On the line with us is Congressman Darren Soto. He represents the 9th District of Florida. He's a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. The website is soto, SOTO.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Darren, D-A-R-R-E-N, Soto. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on the show, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. It's great having you with us. I'm curious your thoughts about these reports. It was just published this morning, in fact, in the Washington Post, as I recall. At least 4,645 people died as a result of Hurricane Maria and its devastation across Puerto Rico last year. The official death toll is 64 people. Harvard University says no, it's 4,600 Puerto Ricans, American citizens, died. What the hell's going on here, sir?
Well, obviously shocking but not surprising. We saw the death toll multiply by exponential amounts after Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, and we have been working as a Congressional Hispanic Caucus to get the exact number from the Commonwealth government, but they have been hesitant to include a lot of deaths that were included in the Harvard study, which I thought was well done. You know, they looked at the mortality rate of other time periods before Hurricane Maria and saw a 64% increase because of no electricity, no hospitals for a period of time, no infrastructure. So there's a lot of people who died simply because they didn't have access to critical health care during that time period, and they do need to be included.
Yeah. It seems to me like it's just either simple geographic and civic ignorance that most Americans don't realize Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. And frankly, that we're not having a reasonable debate. I guarantee you, if the majority of Puerto Ricans voted Republican, the Republicans would be pushing statehood tomorrow morning, and it would probably happen. So, why is it that I'm hearing an echo coming back through your system? Yikes! Can you pot that down, Sean? Is that coming off the phone? Coming through his phone?
Yeah, I put it down.
It's coming from something. Anyhow, I'm wondering, why is it that how is Trump getting away with this? I mean, after Katrina, I mean, for a little while there, George W. Bush was kind of able to ignore the disaster simply because it was black people, the racism in America. Is that what's going on? It's Hispanics?
Well, I can tell you, my home state of Florida, we got the money we needed, thank God, for Hurricane Irma, under Hurricane Harvey. We had Texas get them. But we have big delegations that are influential, but Puerto Rico's got one non-voting member. So the attitude was that, people should be grateful in Puerto Rico to get any funding from the federal government. And we saw that kind of attitude by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and we saw that with the Congress, making sure that they got $18.9 billion from a $90 billion disaster. So this is where we see that second-class citizenship status from lack of representation.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing. Do you see any change coming? Is the Congressional Hispanic Caucus working on this? I mean, is there a movement for Puerto Rican statehood? And is there any way to stimulate at least a conversation about why aren't we rebuilding Puerto Rico? We're rebuilding Afghanistan. We're rebuilding Iraq. We're going to start rebuilding North Korea. What about our own citizens in Puerto Rico?
Well, certainly I was there for the plebiscite. A majority of people voted for statehood, and I came out afterwards for statehood. And I believe if they had representation in Congress and in the U.S. Senate, they wouldn't be so easily ignored. You have a lot of Democrats who are supportive, but some are Commonwealthers. The Republicans have said they've been supported for years, but they haven't lifted a finger to actually do something about statehood out of the obvious fear that there may be more Democratic members of Congress or Democratic U.S. senators. But even that's not a guarantee. Their resident commissioner right now is a Republican. So, you know, we see through Hurricane Maria played out over the last nearly year the shortfalls and problems of Puerto Rico not having equal status with equal representation in that they've been ignored. And one of the only positive things that have come out is that before Hurricane Maria, about 25% of Americans knew my fellow Puerto Ricans are citizens, and now that figure is way over 50%. So that's something we could build on, but certainly this is a classic example of the shortfalls of not having representation in Washington.
That seems like a great stepping off point. We're talking with Congressman Darren Soto, representing the 9th District of Florida. Soto.house.gov is the website. His Twitter handle is Rep. Darren, D-A-R-R-E-N, Soto, S-O-T-O. Congressman, there's been a lot of conversation back and forth, frankly, about this new policy and even how new the policy actually is of tearing children from their parents at the border, even parents who come legally seeking asylum, having their children taken away. And then there's also this issue of these so-called missing 1,500 kids. There was a fascinating thread from Josie Duffy, an immigration expert and immigration lawyer, who this morning on Twitter, who was talking about how stop talking about the 1,500 kids. They're in the custody of Health and Human Services, which is a good thing. That's, you know, these are the people who look out for kids. And just because, and the only investigation that they did was making some phone calls. They couldn't find all of them. You know, cool. Let them find them. But this is not the time to panic about them, particularly if all this panic and uproar causes ICE to get into the act, which is Department of Homeland Security instead of Health and Human Services. You don't want ICE and the cops looking for these kids because these kids are not U.S. citizens and they could end up being deported. That's the argument that Josie Duffy is making. And on the other hand, you know, that we've got this serious issue of the ongoing tearing of children from their parents. And Josie is suggesting these are two separate issues and should be discussed separately. You're very knowledgeable about these issues. And you know, I'm guessing the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is taking some serious positions on these. What is this, you know, how do you think of this whole thing? Summarize all this for us.
Well, they're related, but first it starts with Attorney General Sessions making a policy change that they are going to deliberately separate immigrant children as young as infants from their parents. That is now the official policy of the Trump administration, even though Trump himself called it horrible, but then somehow blamed it on the Democrats, which obviously makes no sense.
Yeah, I didn't know Jeff Sessions was a Democrat.
Yeah, exactly. And so the key is when we're talking about everything from caring for these kids to, in the case of political refugee status, asking a 5-year-old or younger what is the foundational basis of their political asylum application, it takes so many more resources. The kids don't have the facts. They are separated from their parents, and that's problematic by virtue of nurturing and by virtue of morals, but also in that now the state has to care for them more because their parents are around to care for them. Right. And so it undermines their ability for political refugee status because they don't have the facts. It requires more care on behalf of the U.S. government, and it's by far more inhumane than keeping them with their parents. And then afterwards, there's additional costs of reuniting the family should they be deported and finding out. And then from there, this helps create the genesis of this mess of lost kids, because now we're going to have even more kids under the care of the federal government. And last year, 1,500 of them, the whereabouts which were lost. Not to say that they were lost. They could be with family members. They were initially placed with someone who was associated with them. But it shows that the government isn't doing a good job of keeping track of them. And now they're going to implement this, or have already implemented this cruel separation of infants, snatching them from their parents. And it's admittedly as a deterrent factor. We saw General Kelly talk about that the other day, how this is there and it'll discourage people from coming across the border, as if it wasn't because of economic and dangerous threats to their lives that are the reasons people are coming over. So it's cruel. We have put together a letter as of February. We're doing issue-based calls to action in our district. We will be doing one this week. I know Joaquin Castro of Texas has talked about doing one, and other members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So the overall issue is we have to change the separation issue, and from there, it'll mean less kids in the system who then will get lost in this track record that's been exposed from last year of the nearly 1,500 kids is
we just have about 45 seconds left here before we hit a hard break. Is this like the whole, 10 times the penalty for crack cocaine because mostly black people use it? Is this basically pandering to a racist base by the Trump administration, in your opinion?
Well, the hardline rhetoric, the separating of families, the building of the wall, it's all focused on the southern border, which is adjacent to Mexico for everybody who needs a geography lesson. So the proof is in the pudding on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not talking about, going after Canadians. I haven't heard that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and boy, maybe we should go after the Canadians. They have free national health care system. Anyhow, Congressman Darren Soto, one of the good guys, representing the 9th District of Florida, member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Soto.house.gov is the website. Congressman, I hope you can come back someday and perhaps take calls from our listeners and get to know us.
You can count on it, Tom.
Thanks so much. It's great meeting you. Rep Darren Soto is his Twitter handle, DARRENSOTO. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, too, Tom.
We'll be back.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be checking in with Talk Media News in just a few minutes on all the events of the day. Stick around. And welcome back. Boy, what a day. Boy, what a day. Okay, let's see here. Charles Charles, hang on. I want to talk to you. Well, okay, I'll go for it right now. Charles in Minneapolis. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
First of all, thank you for your show. I appreciate a lot of facts that you introduce, and I've listened to you before, but I'm in a disagreement with your immigration thing. There's a lot of kids. Hang on just a second.
What is my immigration thing?
Well, you eliminate all the parents that are trying to get in here and whatnot, and all the kids that are coming in on the train. And there's 12-year-olds up to what age? I'm not sure. Even that would be an economic burden on the country.
There is no disputing that when you increase the labor force, you decrease the demand for labor, and thus you see wages go down. I'm not disagreeing with you, Charles. I wrote a whole chapter about this in my book, Rebooting the American Dream. That's why you have immigration policies. I have said all along, we don't have an illegal immigrant problem in the United States. We have an illegal employer problem. Ronald Reagan fundamentally changed the way we enforce the laws. Prior to 1986, when Reagan gave 5 million people amnesty, he also changed the policy of the executive branch, which has not changed since the day that he did it, by the way. Prior to 86, it was a routine practice of the federal government, of what is now called ICE, to arrest and prosecute wealthy white employers who were encouraging people to come into the United States from other countries illegally to work for them for less money than Americans might work for them. We used to bust employers. When Reagan stopped busting employers in 1986, and prior to 1986, by the way, prior to that time, typically every year you would see about 1 million people come north during the picking season, during the harvesting season. And you'd see something on the order of 1 million people going south. Typically 50 to 100,000 people would stay. They'd stick here. They would move around the country, whatnot. But it was not this, flood of immigrants. And in fact, Dwight Eisenhower in 1956 put into play, as I recall, put into place a program called the Bracero Program, which I think was ended in '64. I'd have to go back and look at the years. It's been a long time since I've read these numbers. But the Bracero Program was basically, we're going to give a card to all these Mexican immigrants who are coming to pick, crops in the late summer and fall, up and down the West Coast in particular, and also through Texas. We're going to give them a card. We're going to call them braceros, and the employer has the ability to cause them to lose their card, and when they've lost their card, they get kicked out of the country. And that was pulled. The reason that program was killed was because employers were using the threat of deleting those cards as a way of extracting everything from sexual favors to low wages to outright wage theft from the braceros, from those people. But until we go back to putting employers in jail, you're going to have people coming to this country because they want to work. It's why Donald Trump has hired over 100 people for Mar-a-Lago from foreign countries. He's getting visas for them, but he's getting them because they're cheap. And these are Europeans that he's bringing in. But, we need to stop that, and we need to start putting these employers in jail, and then people will not come.
Hey,
I love back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the senior foreign correspondent for Talk Media News based out of the UN in New York City. You can follow him as The Courier on Twitter. Luke Vargas. Hey, Luke.
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
Good. So what's up in the world today?
Well, seems like all the indications are that this Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump summit is back on. We've had a lot of developments over the holiday weekend. I'll recap just a few of the most important ones. I mean, from a logistical planning standpoint, there are 2 U.S. teams in Asia right now, one led by the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Joe Hagan, which is in Singapore, currently meeting with North Korean officials to plot out this sort of security and other arrangements, picking a hotel, things like that. It's important that we got confirmation this is happening because this man had gone there before, Hagan, and had failed to rendezvous with the North Koreans. This was sort of one of the reasons we were told the meeting was quote-unquote canceled previously, is because Hagan was there, he waited for 3 days, and the North Koreans were no-shows. Apparently they have showed up, and those logistical meetings are occurring. And then up at the DMZ, based out of Seoul in South Korea, there is another American team, which is led by our ambassador to the Philippines, Sung Kim, that has been going back and forth to the DMZ and meeting with North Korean officials on sort of the diplomatic side. So they are presumably the team that is handling kind of the discussions relating to what might be talked about at the Singapore summit. And then the final piece of the picture here, and there are more headlines we could fold into this very complicated picture, but the only other sort of one I'd point out is Kim Yong-chol, who is the vice chairman of North Korea, the former sort of head of the North Korean spy agency, someone who has played a big role in North Korea's nuclear program and in military strikes by North Korea in the past is en route to New York right now, where we believe tomorrow he will meet with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. So this, again, on all fronts, suggests this meeting is going ahead. And the White House even sort of admitted today that the quote-unquote cancellation note last week was just a negotiating tactic, that it was meant to amp up the eagerness on the North Korean side to come to the negotiating table in the first place. It seems like this thing is back on.
Amazing stuff, Luke. And, we'll see where it goes. What else is going on in the world?
I will point out, we had a very amazing study released today by Harvard University, which is looking at the situation in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican government, unsatisfied with the death toll calculations coming from the White House in particular about the impact of Hurricane Maria last year, commissioned Harvard University and George Washington University to do a more sort of complete picture of the death toll from last year's hurricane. And the data is astounding. The White House has maintained 64 people were killed in last year's hurricane. The new Harvard number is 4,600. So we're talking about a 70-fold increase in the true death toll of that hurricane, that they are now looking at much more than just, people who were hit by a falling tree or something like that. And this 4,600 death toll figure reflects largely interruptions to medical care, which is not just that hospitals had to shut down or had to offer very limited services because of the largest blackout in American history, but that many people who were reliant on paying for generators and paying for sort of electricity provision in their homes for life-saving medical equipment, many of them died because they were not able to pay for those generators or to get electricity for that advanced medical equipment. So again, pretty amazing statistics here, which show just how out of touch the White House has been in characterizing the damage that was done to Puerto Rico.
So over 4,000 U.S. citizens have died in Puerto Rico as a result of the failure of the Trump administration to respond to this disaster and anything that looks like, a meaningful or timely response. Is there any indication that the Trump administration is going to take this seriously, learn from this, throw some money and resources into Puerto Rico?
Well, the White House has not responded to any comments today from the publications doing most of the reporting on this. So I would suggest that if some sort of meaningful plan is underway to rectify the situation, that they are not ready to unveil it, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah. FEMA is it a totally independent agency, or is it part of HHS or DHS?
Oh, boy. I believe it is part of the executive branch, but I don't know exactly where it gets all of its orders from. Right. The final thing I would point out, Tom, I don't know how much time we have left, but we saw these 25% tech tariffs unveiled today by the White House. So they're teasing another $50 billion of tariffs on the Chinese tech sector, which is, it seems to me, the president sort of bowing to critics who'd said that he was focusing on sort of the low-hanging fruit, but not the real, meat of, the parts of the Chinese economy that are kind of ripping off American industry. So we're going to learn about exactly what is going to be targeted on June 15th next month, ostensibly just days after China gets its blessing to some sort of nuclear, deal between the U.S. and North Korea. The timing, I think, is a little bit odd here. But the U.S., again, is basically saying, look, we're so concerned about this forced transfer of technology, China mandating that American companies enter into joint partnerships with Chinese firms, and that's a way that
Trump just got his
siphoned off.
Trump just got his $500 million from the Chinese government for his hotel in Indonesia, and his daughter just got her trademarks for China, which are going to mean multi-million dollars for Ivanka. Yeah. So it's like the Trump train rolls on. Luke Vargas at Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. Stick around. It's coming up on the top of the hour. Here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Talk Media for the sane among us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, excuse me, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's number 3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks excuse me, important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana Godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa Godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. Two of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almaheda coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in the studio with me is Jeff Cohen, the media critic and lecturer, founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he's associate professor of journalism, the author most recently of Cable News Confidential, My Misadventures in Corporate Media, former senior producer with MSNBC's Phil Donahue program, founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, and the co-founder of RootsAction.org. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you. I just retired this month. Seriously? From Ithaca College. Yeah.
Wow.
10 years of being able to celebrate independent journalism. You know, my center was about independent media, non-conglomerated media.
Right.
And I did it for 10 years, and it left me pretty healthy because, you know, the previous 15, 20 years, I was just a media critic talking about what was going wrong with corporate media and conglomerated takeover of media. And so the last 10 years to be able to talk about the journalists who do it right, the journalists who see their job as public watchdogs, the journalists who comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. It's been a pleasure. I mean, people say, God, you're younger now than because when you're at FAIR, it's not a glamorous job, but you have to monitor Rush Limbaugh day after day and watch Fox News night after night.
My God.
Yeah, that can give you indigestion and health problems.
Yes.
So it's been 10 years at Ithaca College, celebrating and teaching independent media. I do a class where we go into the history of independent dissenting media throughout U.S. history.
Right.
And so it's been exciting. And we give away the award every year, the Izzy Award, named after Izzy Stone, I.F. Stone, the legendary journalist from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we've given that award out to Amy Goodman, Naomi Klein, John Carlos Frey, Lee Fong just won it this year. Darja Mail, who does climate change work, expose at Truth Out. He was someone who shared the award this year. Jeremy Scahill, Glenn Greenwald's been to campus. So it's been an exciting 10 years and much better than just being a critic of mainstream media.
That's great. I had a caller in the last hour who wanted to praise Elon Musk for starting Pravda and using it to, quote, hold journalists accountable, or words to that effect. And I was actually so offended by what Musk had said about the media and his creating this Pravda.com website and everything, that Louise and I had been planning for 2 years with the idea of getting the new low-end Tesla, you know, an affordable Tesla. Our name has been on the list for 2 years. And we always figured, you know, when your name comes up, then you have to choose, right? And we'll look at our finances and everything and decide. But over the weekend, I called Tesla and said, take my name off the list. And the question was why, and my answer was because it looks to me like Elon Musk is going after the media, and I'm in the media, and even if I wasn't, I'd be offended by that. And my caller was like, no, wait a minute, you want people holding the media accountable. And I'm like, I'm not sure I want a billionaire holding the media accountable. And he's like, well, somebody's got to hold the media accountable. And I said, you know, I think we can all hold the media. And then it occurred to me, you started fairness, accuracy, and reporting, which is all about keeping the media accountable. So who better than you to ask what's going on? What are your thoughts on all this?
I am with you 100%. I mean, the problem with the media is billionaires have been taking over. The problem with U.S. politics is billionaires are taking over. We need to get working class and middle class people involved in journalism and involved in politics. And you say, tag, you're it. I mean, clearly the problem with our society is the billionaires. So fair.org, if people want to see what real media criticism is, where we have a staff that scrutinizes the media, documents it, does studies, who gets to appear on TV and who doesn't, which think tanks are on the air and which aren't. What's the race and gender and corporate or class orientation of the people that get on the air as experts day after day? Serious holding the media accountable is happening already. If Elon Musk wants to get involved, donate to FAIR. But FAIR won't allow you to play any role in their media criticism. You hold the mainstream media accountable. Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! Holds the Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian on the Young Turks hold the media accountable. No, I'm totally with you. The last thing we need is another billionaire holding the media accountable. They want to help? Donate to nonprofit news outlets. That's the way to make sure you're holding the corporate mainstream media accountable, is donate to those nonprofit outlets or nonprofit organizations like FAIR that do just that.
Well, and I would argue that the other thing that's would be probably pretty useful right now is a modern-day Sherman Antitrust Act.
Of course.
Directed not just broadly. I mean, it needs to be broadly directed. Virtually every industrial sector in the United States and commercial sector in the United States has been monopsonized. You know, it's down to 3 to 5 companies that control the entire sector. But media is one of those.
Yeah. I mean, it's not rocket science. People ask me a lot when I do lectures, how do we get a more small d democratic media system? It's not rocket science. You set up a public broadcasting system where they get permanent insulated funding so the journalists aren't afraid that the right-wingers in Congress are going to shut off, and then public broadcasting can be something you can turn to dig things up instead of our public broadcasting, which is so timid and conservative. You also break up the media monopolies. You also give taxpayer money in a non-ideological way. You subsidize journalism, right-wing, left-wing. You go to Norway, besides having powerful public broadcasting that really raises the level of information among the public, they subsidize websites and newspapers, whether right, left, or center. It's irrespective of ideology. So there's lots of ways of how do you set up a media system that isn't controlled by the billionaires or advertisers or corporate owners, and a media system that can foment democracy. So we know how to do it. The problem is that these media conglomerates are so powerful as lobby in their lobby operation. I'm thinking of Comcast, I'm thinking of Disney, I'm thinking of Murdoch, I'm thinking of Time Warner. They're so powerful that they've been able to take more and more power over the media system. You've talked about this a lot since the Reagan administration, and a few companies have taken more and more opinion-shaping power over the media. It wasn't a natural process. It wasn't something that was inevitable. It was completely a corrupt process. And people are always asking me, rightfully, about Sinclair Broadcast Group and this one company that owns a couple hundred TV broadcast stations across the country. Well, thank Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, who worked together behind closed doors, both parties being funded by media conglomerates, when they did the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Prior to that act, you could only own 12 TV stations across the country. And now Sinclair Broadcast, this right-wing pro-Trump outfit, has 200. That wasn't natural. That wasn't the result of like some pressure group or some big social movement. You know what's wrong with this country, Tom? We haven't allowed enough media power to go in the hands of fewer and fewer companies. You know, there's no one demanding it, no one calling for it publicly, and it keeps happening. Clear Channel, before the Telecommunications Act, had a few dozen, and within a year or two, they had 1,200 radio stations. Right. So it's not a mystery, you know, it's not rocket science. How would you, as you say, invoke antitrust, create true public broadcasting? We've never had that in our country, but you can go to Europe and see what public broadcasting can really do. Mm-hmm. And then allow public money to go to nonprofit outlets. So it's easy to do. You just need to have a different political leadership. As long as the political leadership goes from the Republicans to, you know, the Clinton Democrats, there will never be this kind of small d democratic media system. We can't even get free airtime for candidates. Yeah. I mean, the reason the politicians have to go to the rich people and the corporations is for their ad money. But in other countries, political ads are illegal. Everyone gets free airtime. Yeah, you could thank, to a certain extent, the Supreme Court for that. Yep. Jeff Cohen is with you. You can stick around for a little bit? Sure. Great. You got a movie to promote, all kinds of cool stuff. We'll be right back with Jeff Cohen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Jeff's website, by the way, jeffcohen.org, and the movie we're going to discuss when we come back from this break is allgovernmentslie.com. And welcome back. Jeff, we talked about Sinclair. We've talked about the Izzy Award and Elon Musk. And I don't want to get into the movie until we come back from the commercial break. You know, what are some of the other issues that you're watching right now that have to do with the media? This piece that I wrote and submitted to Alternate this morning, I've got to do some little tweaks on it this afternoon, but is basically how authoritarians rise to power. What specifically do they do? And I went through this list of, you know, they lie often and big, they consolidate their power while challenging and co-opting the institutions of accountability, which includes the media, attack the press, vilify protesters, minorities, and political enemies to the point of provoking violence against them, scapegoat minority groups to rile up mob mentality, elevate one religion that you can control and reward while trashing others, and co-op institutions of military and police power into becoming loyal sycophants, foster a sense of helplessness among the opposition with brutal crackdowns. And there's a couple things I want to add to that this afternoon. But what do you see in that list that are flags for you? The scapegoating of minorities is something that's worked so well in this country, unfortunately. Oh, from the beginning. Right. I started with Native Americans. Of course. And by the way, the media was always a part of that, the mainstream media. There's an incredible book by Juan Gonzalez called Tell All the People, and it's the history of race and media in the country. So what Trump is doing with his right-wing media echo chamber is not new. There's this myth in journalism schools that when you know, minorities were victims of lynch mobs and Chinese immigrants are being attacked in California, that the media was insensitive to or looking away from racism. No. In most cases, the mainstream media were whipping up the lynch mobs. So I think you're right to emphasize especially the scapegoating. It's something that's fertile territory. George Bush II didn't really do it. You know, he say Muslims, you know, he wasn't a Muslim basher. He wasn't Bush an immigrant basher. Yeah, I didn't see him as I mean, his policies were awful in the Middle East, but he would always say Islam is a religion. We respect all religions. There's something that's changed here, and it's Trump going back into the darkest periods of American history, of U.S. history,
which is that scapegoating. And unfortunately, he's got an echo chamber in the media to help him.
Yesterday was the anniversary of Donald Trump, or excuse me, Fred Trump, Donald's father, being arrested at a Klan rally in Jamaica, in New York City.
And our great, one of the great, there's always been two Americas, the America of racism and the America of justice.
Right.
And, Woody Guthrie was a tenant of Fred Trump. And Woody Guthrie, and Woody Guthrie penned a great song with Fred Trump in the lyrics because he knew Trump was a racist. Now, Woody from Oklahoma, a white guy who fought racism his whole life, and he's there near the end of his life. He's living in New York City, and he sees that his landlord is a racist dog, and that's Donald Trump's dad.
Are there any recordings of that song?
I don't think it was put to music, but yeah, the lyrics are online. If people want the lyrics,
I've read them on the air.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever put to music. There was a lot of. He wrote a lot of lyrics. So did Dylan, but he wrote a lot of lyrics that were never put to music. And the great singer from England, the progressive singer, Billy Bragg, has taken a lot of those lyrics and put them to music. Unfortunately, not the Fred Trump one.
We got to work on that.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. This hour brought to you by GetQuip.com/Tom. We're talking with Jeff Cohen, the media critic and lecturer, founder of the Park Center for Independent Media, co-founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. Excuse me, the founder, co-founder, rootsaction.org. So, Jeff, let's talk about this movie. I mean, you're here for a reason. AllGovernmentsLie.com is the website. Tell us about this.
All Governments Lie, Truth, Deception, and the Spirit of I.F. Stone. It's a documentary that I co-produced, and it talks about government deceivers, but more importantly, journalists throughout modern history who've exposed government deceit and corporate deceit. And so it's a movie that stars Amy Goodman and Nermeen Sheikh from Democracy Now! We got the Young Turks in there. We got Jeremy Scahill and Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept, which is so important. We have Tom Eaglehart from Tom Dispatch. We got Michael Moore in there. We got Carl Bernstein. And I think the LA Times, their reference was a damning indictment of mainstream media, but it's really a celebration of independent media. Tom, I listen to your show day after day. I mean, there is something that's happened in the last 15, 20 years, and that's been a boom in independent media, non-conglomerated media, independent voices, voices of the working class and the middle class. And that's really sort of a new thing. I mean, we've always had government deception. We've always had right-wing disinformation and propaganda in the mainstream media. But what's really boomed, and you've been part of it in the last 15 or 20 years, is independent media. And I teach the history of independent media and I have taught it for 10 years at Ithaca College in the journalism department. And this really is a historic thing. Now, it'll come to an end, or it'll be really curtailed if Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, working with Trump's Federal Communications Commission, is able to end net neutrality. Because whether you're on radio or you're a muckraking author or you make documentaries, the internet has been key to the boom in independent media. And it's not a surprise that that offends, that irritates big conglomerates. And it's not something you'll hear on MSNBC. Comcast is the owner of NBC and MSNBC. They talk about the Russian assault on our democracy every hour. They call it breaking news, and they do the same thing they did the hour before, but it's always breaking news. What I'd love to see is 10 minutes among the 24/7 about how Russia is destroying our democracy and focus on U.S. conglomerates and U.S. corporate assaults on our democracy, because the major threat to press freedom today is not that Trump calls reporters bad names. It's that they are working hand in glove to end net neutrality. So that's sort of the gist of the movie, All Governments Lie. It's a celebration of independent media. I'll be in Portland on Sunday, June 3rd. We're going to screen the movie, the documentary, All Governments Lie, at 6:30. And then after that, I'll be doing a Q&A. It's the First Unitarian Church here in Portland.
It's a great church.
Yeah, and I don't know, the sponsors include KBOO and the First Unitarian Church, Social Justice Committee. But after we show the movie this Sunday at 6:30, we'll have a Q&A on anything about media or politics.
Mm-hmm. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah,
I
mean, I've been doing a tour of your great state. Salem, Corvallis, Ashland, Eugene, Florence.
Did you get over to the coast?
Yeah,
Astoria?
Florence. Well, I got the closest was to Florence. The state is so beautiful.
It is. It really
and
is.
then, of course, you don't pump your own gas. There's no toll roads.
Right.
I've been driving a small car, so I don't burn too much fossil fuel. But, I mean, to meet peace and justice activists throughout the great state of Oregon and to see this churn that's happening, they're trying to flip one of these Republican congressional districts. It's pretty exciting. And many of these people, they're listening to your show on some of their community stations.
Yeah, X-Ray FM here
Yep.
in Portland.
And so, I mean, it's sort of exciting to be in Oregon. There's always activism here. There's independent media here. There's independent newspapers here. In Florence and Eugene, pretty new community radio stations. So it's very exciting for me always. And I have family in Mount Hood. So it's always great to be out here.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, they just discovered like 10, 15 years ago that that's still an active volcano.
Oh, you had to. Just when I'm waxing eloquent about Oregon, and you have to tell me that.
No, well, it's kind of. I think it's kind of cool. I mean, I hope it doesn't blow up.
Yeah.
But, so anyhow, we have a little less than a minute left here. What's the main message that you'd like to leave people with?
Celebrate independent media. Support it. Support Free Speech TV. I do the annual Izzy Award, where we give away awards for outstanding achievement in independent media. And it's broadcast every year on Free Speech TV. Support Pacifica. Support community radio. It's not enough to listen to Thom Hartmann or watch Thom Hartmann.
If I may add, by the way, we are on commercial radio stations, for-profit radio stations that are locally owned. In Chicago, in Minneapolis, around
Support
the country.
those stations
You
too.
know, yeah, when you hear an advertiser, call them up and say, thanks for advertising on KTNF or WCPT
I agree
or
with
whatever
you.
it may be.
If you hear independent media and
it
you're
doesn't
getting...
have to be not-for-profit.
Of course. If there are commercial stations carrying the Thom Hartmann Show, let them know you're listening. Spread the word about the Thom Hartmann Show on social media. There's so much that activists can do to support independent media and independent voices. Yeah. It's not enough just to educate yourself. Yeah. You've got to get active.
Jeff Cohen, website jeffcohen.org and allgovernmentslie.com. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons in salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I describe Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil. In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with a plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world." Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And ABC has just canceled the Roseanne show. Roseanne Barr had tweeted over the weekend, fairly racist tweet referencing a Planet of the Apes in the context of Valerie Jarrett, an advisor to President Barack Obama. And that's like, insanely ugly stuff, right? And Wanda Sykes, the comedian, brilliant comedian, was the head writer for the show. And she resigned this morning on Twitter, said, "I won't be returning." And then Kate Arthur just tweeted, ABC has canceled Roseanne. Here's a statement from Channing Dungey, the president of ABC Entertainment. Quote, "Roseanne's Twitter statement is abhorrent, repugnant, and inconsistent with our values, and we have decided to cancel her show." And Joyanne Reed is suggesting, and I agree with her analysis, that Donald Trump has given Roseanne the permission to be this racist, to let it all out here. And I would say, Roseanne, my problem with Roseanne Barr is, who has been a guest on this program, by the way, and who I've met. In fact, well, it's a whole another long story that's probably better not told. But my problem with her is that she doesn't seem to have, as far as I can tell, any core values. This is a woman who ran for president on a platform, literally ran for president of the United States on a platform of health care for all, free education. It was basically the Bernie platform, and long before Bernie, right? And now is a Trumpette, or a Trumpster, or a Trumpista, or whatever. And so it's just like, whichever way she thinks will butter her bread, however she's going to get the most publicity and probably money out of that, she goes with. And it just that offends me. I think I've told the story of one time I was interviewing for our Conversations the Great Minds series, one of the co-founders and senior leaders of a right-wing website that will not be named, but is very well known and very well thought of, by the way, in right-wing circles. And this guy who I'd gotten to know and I liked and respect, although we disagree on politics, made the comment to me. He said, you could be making real money. If you just became a conservative. There's literally 1,000 radio stations in the country that would love to put you on the air. You've got these radio networks that are owned by billionaires or supported by, wealthy corporations. You've got a television network owned by a billionaire, Rupert Murdoch. They would make you a star. You've got talent. You could do this stuff. You could be like Sean Hannity, make, $10, $20 million a year if you wanted. Instead of just, a working man's salary, which is what you're making. Have you ever thought about that? And I was like, yeah, you're not the first person to say this to me, but I'm not going to compromise my principles. These politics this is who I am. It's who I've been since I left behind Barry Goldwater in the Republican Party when I was 14 and said, enough already. And this war in Vietnam is terrible. Actually, I think I was probably closer to 15 or 16 and became a progressive. And I've been there my whole entire life, and I don't intend to change. But Roseanne Barr doesn't seem to have that kind of political or moral compass, tragically. And I think she thought, hey, the racists are doing really well, and I can really, get in with these people. Yeah, let's do some racist. It's really unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. John in Midland, Texas. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Buenos dias.
Buenos dias. Good.
I was listening to the comments about Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, what would it take for Puerto Rico to divorce itself from America and ask other foreign countries for help? What would it take for them to divorce America?
Legally speaking, I don't know the answer to that question, John. And but I think a lot of Puerto Ricans are at the point where it really has to go in one of two directions. Either Puerto Rico becomes an independent nation and can, as you said, reach out to other countries for foreign aid and develop trade alliances and things like that. Because we've pretty much blown up all the trade benefits that they used to have. It used to be a tax-free zone for manufacturing, which is why all the pharmaceutical companies were manufacturing down there. And when that was done away with, and in the last 15 years or thereabouts, Puerto Rico just started sliding really, really badly. So either they need to do that, or they need to become a full-fledged state with 2 senators and a member of Congress, or more than one, who can vote in Congress, and have statehood like Hawaii does. I mean, it should be one or the other.
Okay.
So
maybe they can get after it and do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, John. I appreciate the call. William in Arizona, how do you say that town?
No, this is Bill, right? You're talking to Bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's where my phone is from, I think. I should have called on my home line. I'm in Sunrise Beach, Missouri.
Oh, okay.
But I deliver the travel trailers around the country.
Ah, okay. So what's up?
I took the vacation time. The thing I hate about your program is now that I'm in the queue so long, there's 20 things I want to talk about. But
okay.
No.
Well, pick your favorite one. You can change your mind.
Originally, I called in about the Elon Musk and his comments towards holding the media accountable or whatever. I think he's on a fence there, but our media has been so corrupted, and so they don't give us the news. I don't think they give us the news accurately. They pick and choose what they want. And I know somebody from '86 who worked at WABC in New York radio station, and he said you wouldn't believe the amount of news I'm not allowed to report.
Wow.
They filter it down. So that being said, I think Elon Musk might be one of the billionaires, like Ralph Nader had a book out a few years ago. Either the good, wealthy are going to realize that this country really needs to go back to some FDR things, some kind of program for the common workers, good jobs, good pay, or the evil rich are going to win.
Yeah. Well, if Elon Musk had called for...
it's loaded.
If Elon Musk had called for taking the corporate tax rate back up to where it was before the GOP tax scam and raising the individual rate to the point that billionaires like himself, it's much harder to become a billionaire, and in the process, depress wages for everybody else, and called for an increase in the minimum wage, and most importantly, called for the Sherman Antitrust Act to be applied to media in addition to other industries, then I would be going out of my way to, even if I had to take out a loan from the bank to buy a Tesla. But that's not the direction he went.
Okay, but the things that he got smeared on, or that his company, like I remember it was about 8 years ago, one Tesla caught on fire.
Yeah.
And every media, Tesla's on fire. How many gasoline explosions and deaths go on in this country every day? Yeah,
but he's successfully put that behind him. But I think what people are, what they're focusing on are, he's in the process of trying to prevent a union from forming, for example. I mean, he's fighting a unionization effort
I didn't know that. I wish. Okay, I am on your side with that. There's got to be union representation. I think the teachers are doing a great job of exposing that.
Yeah.
That unions are still important.
I agree.
Now I got more to think about with Elon. But I think he's just been so ostracized, even with the solar power.
Well, just because you love the idea of solarizing America and the world, and he's doing a great job with that. And Leo DiCaprio put him in his last movie before the flood. About his gigafactories, his battery factories. Just because you love and respect the work that he's doing because it happens to be good for the planet, doesn't mean that he's necessarily a good guy, or that his politics are good, or that we should blindly follow him. I mean, he saw an opportunity in the electric car field and in the solar field to make some money, and God bless him, for seeing that and making the money. But when he starts getting into trash in the media, I got a problem with it. Bill, I gotta move along, but thank you for the call. Alexander in St. Petersburg, Florida, listening on WMNF. Hey, Alexander, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I had an interview a few years ago. I'm trying to bring back the Civilian Conservation Corps program by FDR that would probably help our youth in America.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on with Roseanne Barr, and the first thing she asked us, this was back, I think, in 12, when she had a radio show out in Los Angeles. She asked us, "Did you vote for me? Did you vote for me?" And both of us were on. I had a CCC alumni that's is in his 90s, and we just like grumbled over the phone, and we both said, "Sorry, we didn't vote for you." We both voted for Obama.
So did the interview go south, or was she just making a joke?
She was just serious. She sounded really serious when she was asking us, and she was going with a lady friend of mine. I'm involved with the peace movement, and I know her personally, Cindy Sheehan, and. Sheehan's true to her, but then...
Cindy Sheehan is an extraordinary woman.
Yeah, she would never do this. She would never switch around. I was very, very surprised at the interview I think, with Diane Sawyer, and she said, "Yeah, I voted for Trump," and I'm going, "Oh, my gosh."
Yeah.
She just completely reversed herself. So the thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is... a couple things. The Fourth Estate, which you mentioned, the media is getting off track. It's totally. It seemed like it supported Trump in the election 2 years ago, and it's like a circus out there right now.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking about in November we have an election, and I'm thinking of Guy Fawkes, and all over England they celebrate Guy Fawkes for. Bringing the generations to know about treason. And right now...
Well, actually, they condemn Guy Fawkes. He's the anti-hero.
Yeah, he was condemned, but it was for treason. And this man right now, we should have a little slogan, remember the 6th of November. And
ha! Okay, yes. Remember the 6th. Excellent one, Alexander. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Thom Hartmann here with you. 45 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see, John in Bridgewater, New Jersey. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's in your mind?
Your previous caller just mentioned the Civilian Conservation Corps. My father was in it when it started back in 33 or 35.
Yeah, FDR saved our country.
Yeah, he was a kid from the Lower East Side, the old tenement thing, and wound up in Columbia, South Carolina, of all places.
Planting trees?
Can you imagine the cultural change?
Yeah.
Back then. Anyhow, I thought it was interesting. My only point was that, you're an intelligent guy, and I listen to you a lot. But the argument against Trump, I understand why you don't like him. But when everyone goes over the top about the democracy threatened, about fist raise salutes, now to suggest that 4,000 people were died in Puerto Rico because of Trump, certainly infer.
I'm not suggesting that Harvard University is, John.
Well, not you, but obviously the left side of the.
No, it's not the left side of anybody. This is a bunch of physicians and a school of public health that went to Puerto Rico and analyzed the situation and said over 4,600 people have died. Most of them as the result of essentially government negligence on the part of the Trump administration. It's a real thing, John. It's on the front page right now of the Washington Post.
I think a Category 4 or 5 hurricane came first, Tom. So,
it absolutely did, and
don't overplay it. Please, it's the same.
Don't overplay 4,000 dead people.
No, it was
in 4,000 dead American citizens. I mean, how many people died on 9/11, John?
Hey, don't tell me I lost somebody there.
Okay, so you had 3,000 people die on 9/11. Are those 3,000 people who died on 9/11 more important than the 4,000 people who died in Puerto Rico? Shouldn't we respond to the 4,000 people who died in Puerto Rico with at least some small percentage of what we threw into 9/11?
To suggest that Trump caused it is...
I'm not suggesting he caused it. I'm suggesting that he made it far worse.
Yeah.
He brought in corrupt contractors. He got this company out of, there's Ryan Zinke buddies, from Whitefish, Montana, who had never done this kind of work before. Two guys, and they get $1 billion or multi-$100 million contract.
Well,
and they screwed up the country.
How about Clinton in Haiti? I think that didn't go well.
Hey, frankly, John, I don't know enough about what's going on in Haiti to be able to discuss or debate it with you.
You should.
But I do know what's going on in Puerto Rico, and your attempts to change the conversation are not going to work. Puerto Rico is a mess, and it's a mess because Donald Trump did not respond the way that he responded to Houston, which is also, a U.S. territory. Well, it's a U.S. state. The way he, and other places that were hit by that hurricane cluster. We threw all kinds of money into stuff in the mainland. We didn't throw all kinds of money into Puerto Rico. What we sent was corrupt cronies of the Trump administration. And that's one of the hallmarks of a fascist government is having corrupt cronies taking over what should be government functions. So, John, I don't think that we're diminishing the credibility of the left by talking about this at all. I think this is really important and critical stuff that needs to be discussed. Thank you for the call, John. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Tom. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you as we roll down the final stretch of the show today. Mark in Seattle listening on KBCS. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Glad to speak to you, and thanks for doing great work.
Thank you.
I'd like to recount a personal story about media control of the story. It goes back a bit. In the early 2000s, we were living in New York, largest media market in the country. We went to Toronto for a benefit concert, and this was a benefit that was organized by people in Toronto and got some really major acts to play for free to raise money for the healthcare workers who were either killed or injured from the avian flu virus that was transported to Toronto. And if you remember, there were a few dozen people who died, and many families were impacted heavily by this.
Mm-hmm.
The concert was larger than Woodstock.
Oh.
And I went to the original Woodstock, so I know what a big concert's like.
Right.
It was really amazing. It was great music. It raised millions of dollars. We came back to America totally elated about this great event and the possibilities that it represented for raising money in a way like this. Nothing. It was barely covered in the American media at all. And here we were in another major North American city a few hundred miles away. We couldn't believe it. It was a real wake-up call to what gets covered and what doesn't.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, there was no way for any of those big media corporations to make a buck off it, and there was nothing salacious about it. You didn't have Hell's Angels pulling knives and taking people down, right?
That's a really good contrast in what gets covered, stuff like that, or the big money-making music festivals like Coachella, and you know what I mean, and other stuff like that.
Burning Man.
They get a lot. Oh yeah, there's a few 100,000 people, but this was an amazing event. And I just want to say we really do have to be wary of the messaging, and I do really believe this is a slow-mo fascist takeover here. It's been going on for a long time with Fox News, or as I call it, fog noise, as the background setter, and we're seeing it. And we've got to act really strongly, stay together.
Yeah, I'm with you. Mark, thank you for the call. Very well said. Thanks for listening to KBCS. Dave, listening on Sirius XM in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Yeah, hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I want to ask if you have an opinion on a subject that I think's not getting a fair enough attention in the media, but it has to do with the South China Sea and tensions with the United States.
Oh, right. We sailed a battleship or a cruiser or something near one of the Spratly Islands, and the Chinese protested. This is territory that is claimed by several different countries: Japan, I believe Taiwan, certainly China, and the U.S. says that it's international territory. But China is building on these islands and saying this is ours, and this could be a really, really dangerous flashpoint. And it looks like Trump backed down.
Yeah, and you know, and I called you like a month ago, and I was talking about this military paper written by this colonel where he was talking about terms of art and how important that is. But real quick, I mean, to the point, you see, this just triggers automatic action that is troubling to me. Like, all right, what China sees is territorial integrity and really just self-defense, right? By keeping what they want to do is keep an aircraft carrier group at standoff range because they know they don't have any the technology or the defenses to stop a carrier group once it gets so close. And but what we call that aerial denial and freedom of maneuver violations. And you know, and basically China has moved like their one strategic bomber, the Jian H-6K. They've moved that into the area, and they've moved a lot of anti-ship cruise missiles into the area. And frankly, you know, we kicked them out of RIMPAC, the big naval exercise. And apparently they might, I mean, I don't know, but Russia has a large naval exercise going on this year, and China might participate with Russia in a huge naval exercise.
Yeah.
And it's really getting tense, Tom. And these tariffs, I don't know if these tariffs are connected or not. What do you think?
I don't know. The tariffs, I think, are a genuine effort on the part of the Trump administration to keep his campaign promise that he was going to undo these bad trade deals. And it's the one area where I actually agree with Donald Trump. And it's something that he stole from progressive Democrats. Progressive Democrats, ever since '92, when Bill Clinton moved the Democratic Party into an anti-tariff party, into a so-called free trade globalism party. A lot of progressives, a lot of Democrats have always disagreed with that. You know, going back to the '70s, really, in the '80s. And, you know, when Japanese cars started eating Detroit's lunch, you know, Louise and I lived in Michigan until 1978, and we saw this happen. And this kind of long death of the American manufacturing sector. And, you know, I'm all in favor of bringing back manufacturing. So I think that that's what's going on there. Although he's having to do it in a very weird way because he wants to keep that $500 million that the Chinese government gave to the Trump Hotel in Indonesia, and the, 14 patents, I think, that his daughter got so that she can make tens of millions of dollars in the Chinese markets in profits and stuff like that. So, you know, the Trump crime family is so corrupt that even when they keep a campaign promise, they figure out a way to hustle us all, you know, in that context, which is very problematic. But Dave, I don't see those tariffs as a war-provoking flashpoint. I do think, though, that this realignment that's happening of China and Russia versus the United States could be very problematic, particularly with a World War I kind of scenario where some small thing someplace starts triggering mutual defense treaties. This could be a real disaster. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.